What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 754. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me in line all the way from Denver, Colorado. I said that about as fast as possible, Luis. It's Luis, Scott-Vargas.
Yeah, I was just thinking.
I'm just mowing down syllables.
Auctioneer mode.
I said it so many times, you know. We're going to do the Mythic Rare and special guest review here for MH3. You excited? Stoked?
Oh yeah, this set. I mean, look, I know it's like kind of early-ish in terms of the set's lifespan, and in fact, I bet most of our listeners haven't actually even played the set yet. By the time they listen to this, they will have, because we're recording this basically right as the set comes out on all the online platforms. But I'm double-digit drafts in, because between early access and the MTGO like creator beta, I've just been jamming. The set is a lot of fun, and I've actually gotten to play with or against a lot of these cards already.
Well, I'm going to lean on you. I have not. I mean, I did technically get to do one draft of this set, but it was, you know, for a content thing. So like, I haven't actually got to do just one straight up draft of it yet. And of course, I'll be starting soon along with our listener base. But it's really great that you got that head start, and we'll use it today. Before we get into the review, we want to say thank you to each and every one of our patrons over at patreon.com/limited resources. That's a way to support us directly if you like what we do, and we really appreciate every person who does so. We also want to thank Ultimate Guard. They make the best stuff in the business. If you need a deck box, sleeves, stuff to protect your cards, your decks, your collection, Ultimate Guard is the place to go. You can check out ultimateguard.com to look at all of their products, and then you can go to your favorite online retailer or your favorite local game store and pick up whatever it is that you need. Thank you, Ultimate Guard, and we highly encourage you to check them out. Luis, before we start with the actual cards, let's hit the grading scale overview so people know how we do this.
All right, so we use an A through F grading system with 2 subgrades. A's are the bombs, game winners, cards that are great, you know, in any situation, especially when behind, and super efficient cards. You're going to see a lot of A's. The Rare and Mythic review tends to cluster on the 2 poles there. Mm-hmm. B's are cards like, or A's are Bonnie Paul, Railway Brawler, Terror of the Peaks, just, you know, the best cards in the set. B's are cards that actively pull you towards their colors, or in this case, for MH3, it's less color pairs and more themes, you know, whether that be modified or eldrazi or affinity. And some of those are very tied to a color pair. Some are to like a 3 different color trio. In any case, Bs are cards that are just very strong, good cards that you're happy to take in the first couple picks, and you're happy to play. Cards like Lassoed by the Law or Outcast or Greenblade, you know, the best uncommons. C's are playable. These are the pawns of limited. You're not going to see tons of rare C's, just because rares, again, tend to either be better or worse than that, or more situational. But, you know, every now and then a rare is just a solid, fine card that you're not really complaining about. Cards like Patient Naturalist or Ambush Gigachad. D's are the cards that you're kind of unhappy if you have to play them. They're just a little bit worse than kind of, they're a little bit lower than the like baseline level of card. We're talking cards that are a little bit too expensive, a little bit too narrow. But just given the way sets are these days, even the Ds are just completely fine. Cards like Boneyard Desecrator or Deadeye Duelist. Fs you'll see plenty of. These are cards that are unplayable in virtually all scenarios. They cost tons of mana, though. In this set, actually, you can just cast 10 and 12 drops, so that's not a complete disqualifying factor, not like most. But we're talking cards that are just too weird or narrow. They refer to Planeswalkers. Cards like Kellen Joins Up or Another Round that just really aren't made for limited play, to be honest. And then the 2 subgrades, you have sideboard, cards that you typically wouldn't main deck or wouldn't be that great in the main deck, but will be great out of the sideboard. You know, cards like Bovine Intervention or Naturalize. Not a ton of rares fall into this category. And then build around. Rares do fall into this category, which are cards that by themselves aren't typically good enough. They don't really do anything, but with the right support can be among the best cards in your deck. Cards like Intimidation Campaign.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, you know, this set particularly has a very synergy-based theme, sub-themes, or decks that aren't as quite focused on color. And that means that there's a lot of these that are going to fall into either build around, or you need to have them in the right situation and then they can shine, but they don't need to be fully built around. And we'll start off with white this time. Our first card up is Guide of Souls. And this is an example, you know, one of the main mechanics that they have in the set is energy. And, you know, that sort of has a slight build around element to it right off the bat. This is white for a 1/2 human cleric at rare. And it says, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life and you get an energy. And it says, whenever you attack, you may pay 3 energy. When you do, put 2 +1/+1 counters and a flying counter on target attacking creature. It becomes an angel in addition to its other types. Man, that's a nice energy sink right there.
Yeah, Guide of Souls is just awesome. Like it's very cheap, 1 mana. It generates energy and life. So like you could put this in any white deck and it would be decent. And the trigger when you attack is really, really strong because you pay 3 energy, but it's permanent counters and a permanent flying counter. Like those don't go away. So you end up in a spot where you just have a massive flyer that's a threat they have to deal with. And the way this typically works, because I've actually played with it a couple of times now, you don't want to put the counters on this. You don't want this to be the card they have to kill. You put it on a random 2/3. Let's say you have like the 2/3 energy tapper. Now it's a 4/5 flyer. They kind of have to kill it, but then you still have your Guide of Souls and threatens to do it again. It also triggers whenever you attack, not when you attack with it. So late in the game, if you top deck this, it's still totally great. Like it's good at any point. Turn 1, great. You play it. If they don't kill it, you just generate tons of energy. Turn 7, you draw, play this, attack because you already have some energy, and all of a sudden your 4/4 is now a 6/6 flyer. So I would give Guide of Souls an A-. I think it's a fantastic card. You do want to put it in a deck with other energy cards ideally, but you can totally play this in any white deck that has a lot of creatures, and I would look at this as a really good reason to go into energy.
Yeah, this is the type of card that costs 1 mana and is either great early or very good late. That's A-. Next card up is Ocelot Pride. This is also just white for a 1/1 cat. This one is a mythic rare. It's got First Strike, Lifelink, and Ascend. That's the one, remember, that cares about you controlling 10 or more permanents. And it says, at the beginning of your end step, excuse me, if you gained life this turn, create a 1/1 white cat creature token. Then if you have the City's Blessing, which is what it's called if you've reached Ascend, for each token you control that entered the battlefield this turn, create a token that's a copy of it. Man, that's so... These are 1-drops?
So when you have Ocelot Pride, so you're open for 2 things. One is that you're just like on the play and have it in your opening hand, even on the draw, and you can get like 1 kind of uncontested hit in, at which point you have 2 1/1s and you have a gain to life and you have a First Strike Lifelinker in play. The other thing is white is one of the modified colors. So where I'd look to play this is in one of the like white-green or white-black or white-black-green, whatever combination of those modified decks, because First Strike Lifelink, that wishes +1/+1 counters and auras really well. So by itself, like I don't think I would necessarily want this in an energy deck or a deck that doesn't have ways to pump it. But if you have ways to pump it, this card is a serious business. So I think I'd give it around a B grade, but it's almost like a build around A, where if you can consistently modify this, like turn 1 Ocelot Pride, turn 2 Throw a Line, the white-black adventure card, the core, you put 2 counters on this, the game kind of ends if they don't have a removal spell. You have a 3/3 lifelink First Striker that generates a cat every turn. Like that is a lot.
Is there any token synergies like with the Ascend mechanic and like trying to do some crazy stuff with generating extra tokens?
I mean, if you get up to 10 and you have multiple things that make tokens, yeah, this card could kind of pop off too.
Okay.
It also works with
really
other life gain
focus
stuff. But yeah, I don't think that's going to come up like a ton. So I would overall just give Ocelot Pride a B, but keep in mind it's better in the modified decks. And one real quick aside, this format is a Modern Horizons format, which means a couple things. It is quite powerful. Like the cards have to do a lot. And every good deck just about is going to be heavily themed. Like you're very rarely going to experience the like thing in limited of, I just have a white-green deck that just has white and green cards. It's like, no. You don't have a white-green deck that has white and green cards. You have a white-green modified deck that's not really looking at the Eldrazi cards very much.
Right.
And there's some cards that are definite crossovers, but I look at this and I'm like, okay, this is pretty heavily themed towards the modified deck. And there's some amount of things like, yeah, Scurry of Gremlins and, red-white energy can have like a go-wide theme. This will fit great there too. But overall, you want your cards to be doing a specific thing most of the time. You're not looking for just value. So I would say overall B for Ocelot Pride, but it's got a lot going on.
Next is Orum's Chant. It's white for an instant at rare. It's got Kicker for white. It says target player can't cast spells this turn. Then if this spell was kicked, creatures can't attack this turn. Is this worth playing in limited?
No, I think this is an F. Its constructed playability is as a sideboard card against Storm decks or with Isochron Scepter, which that's just long since kind of outmoded at this point. I I wouldn't put this in your deck. It just doesn't do enough. It's too often just a brick.
Yeah. Don't get tricked into thinking that this is like Time Walk or something. This is F for Wormstand. Next is a Johnny Nacatl Pariah. This is 1 and a white for a 1/2 legendary cat warrior at Mythic Rare. And when it enters the battlefield, you get a 2/1 white cat warrior creature token. So 2 mana, you get a 2/1 and a 1/2. And whenever one or more cats you control die, which remember the friend is a cat and this is 2 technically, but whatever. And then you may exile a Johnny, then return to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control, and it becomes a Johnny Nacatl Avenger, which is a planeswalker for 3 loyalty that has +2, put a +1/+1 counter on a cat you control. 0, create a 2/1.
Each cat even.
Oh, sorry, on each cat you control.
Not
0,
a huge difference here, but
maybe not, but we did already have 1 cat out of 4 cards. 0 loyalty, create a 2/1 white cat creature token. When you do, if you control a red permanent other than a Johnny Nacatl Avenger, he deals damage equal to the number of creatures you control to any target. A little weird, but okay. And then -4, each opponent chooses an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker from among the non-land permanents they controlled, and they sacrifice the rest.
So a Johnny is mostly 2 mana for a 1/2 plus a 2/1. That's the bulk of its value, but it has this additional thing where if you can keep a Johnny alive and make it so that your 2/1 dies, which isn't too hard, your opponent eventually has to attack you in a lot of cases, or you have a sacrifice outlet or whatever, then it just flips and pretty much starts making cats and then pumping those cats. And if you're red-white, it even starts nugging them. That's a lot of action for just 2 mana. I'm in for a Johnny. I would say a Johnny is also like an A-. Like, it's just a really threatening card. When your opponent plays it on turn 2, you're just like, okay, I'm going to get attacked by this, and if I kill that 2/1, then I'm in a lot of trouble. If they have a sack card, it just does a lot.
That does a lot for 2 mana. Next is Argent Deus. This is 1 and a white for an artifact at Rare. It says Argent Deus enters the battlefield with 2 oil counters on it. Whenever 2 or more creatures attack, you put an oil counter on the Deus, and it says you can pay 2, tap it, and remove 2 oil counters from it to exile another target non-land permanent, and its controller draws 2 cards.
Yeah, first of all, there's not a whole lot of oil counter support. Obviously, just self-fuels, but it's way too expensive for you to really use it on their stuff. And even using it on your stuff, it's like you play this, you get the first ability for free in terms of oil counters, but you're still paying 4 mana to exile one of your permanents and draw 2 cards. It's like the worst, Village Rites type card ever. So I think Argent Deus looks like an F to me. I don't really want to put this card in my deck.
Yeah. There might be some cool stuff you can do with Argent Deus, but we're going to give it an F. Next is Philia Exuberant Shepherd. This is 1 and a white for a 2/2 legendary creature dog at Rare. It's got flash. And whenever it attacks, you exile up to 1 other target non-land permanent. At the beginning of the next end step, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If it entered under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Philia.
So it might seem aggressive, but I also think this card is like an A-. Like,
whoa,
the way this card plays out is really nice. So you play at end of their turn. When you attack, it can always remove a blocker. So it's pretty hard for this to block. You can just exile one of their things until end of turn.
Okay.
It eats any token. Like if you attack and target their token's just gone. Or you'd re-trigger your own stuff and get the ETB, and the Philia gets +1/+1. Like a counter. Like this card just for 2 mana does so much. Reed beat the crap out of me with this in early access, and it's also just I've just seen it played. It's just really good. It does more than it looks, and it's only 2 mana. And if you ever have a way to bring it back from the graveyard, if they kill it, or like a combat trick or something, you can really get them because they're going to be pretty heavily incentivized to try and block this. So I would say Philia gets an A-. It gets better the more aggressive you are and the more ETBs you have, but overall, it's just a really strong card.
Wow, I'm convinced. I really like the killing tokens thing too. Next is White Orchid Phantom, which is white for a 2/2 Spirit Knight at Rare. It's got flying and first strike. And when it enters the battlefield, destroy up to 1 target non-basic land. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, tap, and then shuffle.
So this is mostly just, what you see is what you get, and what you see is a 2/2 flying first strike for white, which is pretty hard. You won't always be able to cast it early. This is also not only a multicolor format, but a very strong cycle of lands, the common fetch lands, tap for colorless. So you're going to run into problems with double colored cards where your opening hand has like 2 or 3 fetch lands, and you go turn 1, play 1, go get a plains. Turn 2, you can't play this unless you have another plains in hand.
It's annoying.
A lot of your, like, I've at this point already had plenty of decks that are like 4 swamps, 2 plains, 2 forests, and like a ton of fetch lands, plus some of the tapped, double-faced lands. Mm-hmm. And it is punishing to double color costs because the lands often come into play untapped for colorless only. So the ability doesn't do anything. Like
the ability doesn't do anything. And first strike on a flyer,
it's just
2
fine.
power flyer is like whatever. Like that's a little bit redundant.
I mean, because if this cost 1 and a white, I would be like, all right, C+. At white, it's honestly like a C-. It's just you're not going to cast it when you want to cast it enough. So I don't think White Orchid Phantom
not
has a whole lot going on.
Next is
Wrath of the Skies, though.
Yeah,
that's Skies. A card. It's
go ahead.
X white for a sorcery at rare. You get X energy counters. Then you can pay any amount of energy and destroy each artifact, creature, and enchantment with mana value less than or equal to the amount of energy paid this way. So as the only energy card in your deck, this is a sweeper of white X, destroy all things that cost X or less. Okay. But it does a bunch of other stuff. 1, you can overpay and have excess energy left over. Let's say you pay this, pay 8 mana, but then you blow up everything that costs 3. Well, you ended up with 3 extra energy. You can also use energy you gained before. So I've cast this card for white, generating no energy and then just paying the 4 energy I already had. So it's a super efficient sweeper. And because it's X or less, you can kind of set it up, hopefully, so that you blow up all their stuff and maybe leave one expensive thing on your side. The biggest downside is this kind of sucks against the Eldrazi decks because all their stuff costs more than yours. But this is a super strong reason to go into energy. I think this is a build around A where in a dedicated energy deck, this card is just bananas. It generates energy. It spends energy. It lets you kind of pick and choose how you want to destroy everything, like, depending on what's in play. And it's just overall this good combination of flexibility and power that just goes places.
Man, it hits creatures, enchantments, and artifacts too.
Yeah, it hits everything but planeswalkers, basically.
Wow.
Outside of an energy deck, this card gets a little worse, but it's still pretty good if you're looking for a sweeper. The problem is, what white deck isn't an energy deck? Well, I guess that's like the modified deck mainly, and this isn't the best there because they tend to have a lot of permanence and not on the high cost end. So I would look at this more as an energy card than anything else, but it's a really good one. And if you're in white and not energy and you see this late, it's still potentially worth putting in your deck. So I would give Wrath of the Skies a build around A. It's a strong card.
That seems awesome. Wow. I'm impressed. Next is Pearl Ear Imperial Advisor. This is 1 white for a 3/4 legendary Fox Advisor at rare. It's got lifelink. So 3 mana, 3/4 lifelink. And it says enchantment spells you cast have affinity for auras, of all things. And it says whenever you cast an aura spell that targets a modified permanent you control, draw a card. It just has to target too. That's nice. So this is just the all-in, really all-in auras, right? Like this is even, all in for auras, right? Like this isn't just modified.
Well, it rewards you for having modified. So like auras mostly means bestow creatures, but what you want to do is cast a bestow creature on a modified permanent you control to draw a card. So that modification can be a +1/+1 counter to start with. So it does kind of reward you for both. It's also 3 mana for a 3/4 lifelink, which is pretty big.
It's a good target to modify, yeah.
And making the affinity thing is not that real. Like once you already have an aura in play, your next one costs 1 less is just kind of whatever. This looks like a build around B. Like I would be interested in playing this in a modified deck, but I don't think I would like windmill slam it first pick.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, but that like whenever you target with an aura, you draw a card, like that's going to add up really quickly if you can build around it properly. Next is Recruiter of the Guard. This is 2 and a white for a 1/1 human soldier at Mythic Rare, It says when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a creature card with toughness 2 or less, reveal it, put it in your hand, and then shuffle. Interesting to see this card here. These type of cards are generally very powerful. When you look, especially at a more down the road format like MH3 here, you can find a bunch of awesome stuff with a card like this. The question is it too slow? Like, is it worth it to be able to dig up a specific card at the cost of having to play something that's really not great? A 3-mana 1/1.
I think mostly no. Like you really would have to do a good job of taking advantage of the 3-mana 1/1, which means, things like the uncommon black sack a creature to kill any creature, sort of like sacrifice things basically. Because the other thing is, yes, you can tutor for some good stuff, but toughness 2 or less is pretty low. We're not talking constructed where you get to put Solitude and Mother of Runes and and Flicker Wisp in your deck
we'll talk really about high impact. Solitude in a few minutes.
It's true. If you're lucky enough to have Solitude,
if you're very lucky,
get better.
Yeah.
It's a special guest mythic rare. It shows up almost never.
Yes.
But how often in an average deck is this tutor ability better than draw a card?
Yeah, I think that you would really have to have a toolbox. Like you would have to have something that was good when you're behind, ahead, and at parity, like one each of those, or that solved a specific problem or something like that.
Yeah, so I think that Recruiter of the Guard looks kind of like a D to me on face value, and I could see doing some work to get it up to like a C plus even, but it's not a card I'm going to go after.
I'd probably just put it at build around B, right? Like if you had a Guide of Souls in your deck, Recruiter of the Guard looks a lot better, plus anything that said like when it ETBs, it blows up an artifact, or just something that could solve a problem, something like that. Another one that's also a reprint is Savine's Reclamation. This is 2 and a white sorcery. At Rare, return target permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If this spell was cast from a graveyard, you may copy this spell and you may choose a new target for the copy. And the reason that it references that is because it has flashback for 4 and a white.
If you have the deck built to utilize this, I think it's pretty good. Like
it is solid. This card's in the Vintage Cube on Magic Online and is like, you see it cast every once in a while. It's on the bottom end, but
definitely. But casting this and getting a 3-drop back, you're even on mana.
Mm-hmm.
You don't feel like you're too down. You paid the cost of this card could be in your hand and uncastable for some amount of time. But then when you flash it back, like that is a payoff. Flashing it back and getting to get 2 things back. So now you paid not only 5 mana for 6 mana worth of cards. I'm assuming you're targeting 3s mostly. You also, it's a 0 for 2. So like you kind of Ancestral Recall leveled card advantage. Obviously costs a lot more mana, but getting to cast this for no card cost because it's out of your graveyard to get 2 things back. I think Savine's Reclamation is a B, and I would just look to have a deck that has ample targets for it. Also, you're not going to want to do this very often, but you can get a fetch land back. So like you can pick up a 3-drop plus just one of the fetch lands if you have nothing else to get.
Totally. And, this is a type of card that when you have it in your hand, you can play a much different game plan than when you don't. And that's very powerful as well. Last white card is Flare of Fortitude, which is 2 white for an instant at Rare. It says you may sacrifice a non-token white creature rather than pay this spell's mana cost. And by the way, this is part of a cycle. So this is we should talk about the cost that you have to pay here, Luis. Really steep. This one, though, the white one says, until end of turn, your life total can't change, and permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible. So what about that cost? Because we will see that on other cards here. Sacrifice a non-token white creature, and then if you do so, you can cast this for free. Ouch.
So, it's a big cost, but this is a pretty big sweeping effect. Where I guess I would start with this card is like, how often do you want this effect? So until end of turn, your life total can't change. Okay, so that's like a fog. It can stop their lethal attack, sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then permanents you control are hexproof and indestructible. So it's a way to save your creatures from either a sweeper or a targeted spell.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, I don't want to spend 4 mana for that.
No.
It's just not effective to do that. And sacking a creature to do that, like if you're sacking a creature to save 1 creature, you're 2-for-1ing yourself. You spent 0 mana, but like, where are you getting this extra creature that's worth sacking? I guess Recruiter of the Guard, right? That mythic rare.
Your mythic rare,
but,
yeah.
Overall, I think Flare of Fortitude is like a D or an F. I could see siding it in against something like Wrath of the Skies, like that would be reasonable to me. And the problem is it's just too narrow. Like, yes, we can all think of situations where your opponent taps out for a big overrun style effect, attack, scurry of gremlins, attacks you with everything. You're tapped out and you're like, haha, gotcha, sack my, 2/2 to cast this card. But balance that with all the times this card's just in your hand doing nothing over and over again, like just so many turns of not doing anything. So I don't really see it. I think this is more of a constructed, I want to stop Supreme Verdict specifically than a limited card that I want to play. So I would give Flare of Fortitude probably a D and just not want to be, put this card in my deck and maybe you sideboard it in.
Yeah, maybe a sideboard grade. And I agree with what you said. This is also a card that's perfect to put on the quadrant. If you want to do quadrant theory, Flare of Fortitude will clarify your best case scenario mentality very quickly. All right, that moves us to blue. Our first card up is called Strix Serenade. It is blue for an instant at rare. It says counter target artifact, creature, or planeswalker spell. Its controller creates a 2/2 blue bird creature token with flying. These never ever play well in limited.
No, they really don't.
And this one's particularly brutal. A 2/2 flyer?
I mean, it's just Swan Song, but a different iteration of that. Swan Song countered a non-creature spell, I think, or actually think of specifically instant sorcerer enchantment.
And this one actually can hit creatures, but I would give it an F too.
I just don't think you're really going to end up wanting to do this. It's just not really going to work. So
history says that these do not play well and always have a very, very low win rate.
Giving them a 2/2 flyer is just crazy bad for you. So brutal. F on Strix Serenade, which leads us to Tamiyo, Inquisitive Student. It's blue for an 0/3 with flying, legendary Moonfolk Wizard and Mythic Rare. Whenever Tamiyo attacks, create a clue, you investigate. And whenever you draw your third card in a turn, you exile Tamiyo and return her as Tamiyo Seasoned Scholar, a 2 loyalty planeswalker that has +2 until your next turn. Whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, it's -1/-0 until end of turn. So pretty effective way to stop attacks, unless they're big eldrazi attacks or big modified attacks, I guess. -3, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand, and if it's a green card, add a mana of any color. And then -7, draw half your deck and you have an emblem with no max hand size. I really like Tamiyo. You play Tamiyo on turn 1. That's the ideal scenario, right? We're looking at a 1-drop. Turn 2, you attack, get a clue. If you have no 2-drop, you just crack the clue. You're already just up on cards. And it's not that hard to stack up a couple of clues, then flip Tamiyo or cast a card draw spell. There's a bunch of them in the set that will kind of flip her. She's fantastic for the draw 3 deck. That's kind of like the blue-black theme of drawing extra cards. But any blue deck, I would just put Tamiyo in my deck. The +2 ability of giving all their attackers -1/-0 is pretty strong. And you're going to have games where you don't even really want to flip Tamiyo, or you're happy just getting a clue at turn. So I would give Tamiyo a B+, just a good card in any blue deck. You don't really have to do anything to make that work.
Cool design too. Awesome. I love everything about that card. Next is Volatile Storm Drake. It's 1 and a blue for a 3/2 Drake at rare. It's got flying and a hexproof from activated and triggered abilities. And it says when it enters the battlefield, exchange control of Volatile Storm Drake and target creature an opponent controls. If you do, you get 4 energy. Then sacrifice that creature unless you pay an amount of energy equal to its mana value.
So there's some weird stuff going on with this. So first of all, if they don't have a creature in play, then you just get a 2-mana 3/2 flyer with hexproof from activated and triggered abilities.
Oh, okay. So
that's kind of cool, but you can't really count on them having no creatures. You are forced to make the exchange if they do have a creature in play.
Okay.
And then if you're not playing energy, the best this can do is trade for a creature of 4 or less cost. And most of the time, I think a 4-drop, a 3/2 flyer with this minor ability, like the hexproof thing, is probably on par or better than most cards that cost 4 or less. I think
so too. It feels like you're spending mana and a card to, maybe at best mildly downgrade one of their cards.
And they get the first attack. They're probably just going to attack you with this thing away.
Come on.
So I don't really like this.
What if you have tons of energy? Is it good then?
Right. Yeah, I mean, 2 mana to steal their 7-drop and give them a 3/2 is pretty good still. And it doesn't take that much energy to do that. I found that generating energy is not the most impossible thing in the world, really.
Man, I just don't like any of this. There's times when you steal their 7-drop on the ground, but your life total's a little low and you just gave them a 3/2 flyer and you're like, well, I'm not really Like, is there a scenario where you just couldn't cast this? Like, where you're like, well, I can't put this on the battlefield?
Oh, certainly. There's a lot of them. One is like, if you don't have a enough energy to pay for their thing, like that could be a pretty significant drawback. You can end up in a spot where you can't give them a 3/2 flyer, even if you are taking something. So the Stormdrake looks like a sideboard card to me, or like a C in a dedicated energy deck. It is good with bounce spells. If you can like play this, then bounce it back to your hand, but they can't be activated or triggered bounce spells. It has to be an actual spell. And yeah, overall, it plays out weird. I guess this mostly has specific matchups, which is what leads me to think it's kind of like a sideboard B, or a main deck like C or D. So I would overall say it's just a sideboard B. That's going to be most representative of what Volatile Stormdrake's going to do.
Classic beat me with it too. Like, like you're going to have to show me. Next is Amphibian Downpour. Why would an amphibian care about a downpour? It's 2 and a blue for an aura. It's got flash. It's rare. It also has Storm. And I'm just going to read what Storm says now. It says, when you cast a spell, copy it for each spell cast before it this turn. You may choose new targets for the copies. Copies become tokens. So in this case, aura tokens. They enchant creature. It enchants a creature, and it says enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a blue frog creature with base power and toughness 1/1. Did they finally found a Storm card that we can't break, Luis? Is this it?
Yeah, it's certainly not broken in the like play 7 spells, then play this range, but I'm kind of curious what you think about this card.
So I guess for most Storm cards, I set the line at 2. So like I get this plus an additional copy because my opponent casts a spell on their turn, something like that. That's a good
typical use case
baseline. So if I got 2 of these for 3 mana, that's actually not that bad. And I really like that it has flash. That helps with the Storm and then also helps with combat. I'm like vaguely in for Amphibian Downpour, which I got to say, when I first read it, I didn't think I would be, but I actually kind of like it. Also, I don't know if there's anything I can do crazy, but I can put this on my guys too, right?
Yeah, if you want to.
Like if I have some modified.
One of your creatures modified.
Yeah. Put like 7 of this on one and have it do some crazy thing or something. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, my gut, again, not having played the format.
Figured it out.
What's that?
That rare Light Pause card. You storm a bunch and you cast this and target all your stuff, and you just draw a bunch of cards.
Yeah, see, we did it. I would give Amphibian Downpour like a C. Like looking at it, it looks playable.
Yeah, I actually think it's even a little better than that. I think it's like a B.
Sweet, that's awesome.
Like this card is just. It actually does enough, and I think there's a couple of cases where it's really good. It's really good against the Eldrazi deck because they just have these massive things that all of a sudden you just shrink. It's not actually as good against Modified because the auras and the counters don't still like go on top of this. But the thing is, you also end up in a spot where you erase the text of those creatures, so they are losing some of their abilities that are like, oh, if I'm Modified, do X or whatever, and it's also really good in the Eldrazi deck because that deck doesn't have room for a lot of interaction. You can't really put 5 removal spells in the deck that really needs all its ramp plus its big things, right? It's all the support. So having like this to just answer multiple flyers, for example, can be really good. I've found Amphibian Downpour to be great. Like end of their turn, you cast it and you just like frogify 2 of their creatures. Sometimes they play 2 spells, or you have a cheap instant and you do 3. Like. The longer the game goes on, the better this gets, and this is actually a pretty solid card. I would give it a B. I think Amphibian Downpour is a card you should mostly be playing.
That's awesome. I love that. Next is Dreamtide Whale, which is 2 and a blue for a 7/5 whale at rare. It's 3 mana, 7/5. It has Vanishing 2. So it says this creature enters the battlefield with 2 time counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, remove a time counter from it. When the last is removed, you sacrifice the creature. And it says whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, Proliferate, which allows you to choose any number of permanents and or players and then give each another counter of a kind they already have. And obviously it's built into itself to, buy it some time, as it were.
Yeah, so you play this as just like a massive creature. It's cheap enough that you can often play 2 spells in the same turn. And you end up in a spot where like they have to deal with this huge thing. Plus you're getting to proliferate multiple times, which if you're an energy deck, you get to put some more energy on yourself or counters or what have you.
Because you only get one attack with it as it's statted, right? It comes down on your upkeep, you remove a counter, you attack with it, your next upkeep, it's gone.
Yeah. Well,
unless you can proliferate.
Or if they play 2 spells, because it actually does.
That's annoying. Okay. But again, if nobody does anything, you get to swing with it once, block with it twice.
Then it goes away.
Okay.
I think this card's interesting. I think that in an energy deck with a low curve, I would be happy to play this card. Like it's like around a B level card. It's unplayable in an eldrazi deck. That deck's mono 1 spell per turn. And overall, if you have a cheap enough curve, it's justifiable. Think of it a little bit like a Rotting Regisaur, where like it's here for a good time, not a long time. Like the game is gonna end, or it's gonna go away most of the time pretty quickly. Yeah,
7's a really important inflection point for power because it does represent a 3-turn clock on its own. And in most games, 2 hits with this would be pretty good. What do you want to give the whale?
I would give it a C. Like, okay. I think it's a card that in some decks can be pretty good, but it's not a card you're going to go out of your way to try to get.
What about Estrid's Invocation?
It says 2 and a blue for an enchantment at rare, and you may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of an enchantment you control, except it also has, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may exile this enchantment. If you do, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. So it's a copy enchantment that can also flicker itself. It's also an F. You just can't put this card in your deck. There's just not enough enchantments.
Flare of Denial is next. It's 1 blue for an instant at rare. It says you may sacrifice a non-token blue creature rather than play the spell's mana cost. This one's really straightforward, though. It's just counter target spell. So you're getting 1 blue counter a spell just to cancel, and in an absolute pinch, you can sacrifice a non-token blue creature to cast it for free. Do either of those modes entice you? I mean, 3 mana hard counter feels pretty slow.
Yeah, I'm not really that interested in cancel, and I don't think you're going to have blue creatures to sacrifice willy-nilly all that often.
Yeah.
So I'm not super into this card, but I do think that there's matchups where it's good. So I would say this is more like a sideboard B, where if you're playing against, say, an energy deck with Wrath of the Skies or an Eldrazi deck that's really trying to get to that Kozilek, this card can be fantastic. But in the average deck, I'd say you probably don't want to start by playing it.
Yeah. Next is Harbinger of the Seas. This is 1 blue for a 2/2 Merfolk Wizard at rare. And it says non-basic lands are islands. And by the way, that's not islands in addition to their type. That is, it changes it to an island.
It's basically Blood Moon or Magus of the Moon on a Merfolk.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can probably say like 1 out of every 17 times you play this, you can maybe screw someone who's got a fetch land mana base. Right. But like, come on, that's just not going to happen. So no. F for the Harbinger, but we get to a cube staple and also a good card in Legacy. Now modern. Kappa Cannoneer. It's 5 and a blue for a 4/4 artifact creature turtle warrior. It's a turtle with a giant cannon on the back. It's a rare. It has improvise, so you can tap your artifacts to help pay for it, which is very nice. And it also has ward 4, and whenever it or another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it can't be blocked this turn. So I think the templating on this card is just ridiculously bad, but it's because it triggers on itself. So it's always a 5/5.
Yeah.
So just think about this card as a 5/5. I mean, if you have a decent amount of artifacts in your deck, you don't even need that many, honestly. This card is massive. Like, imagine you tap 2 artifacts to cast this. 4 mana 5/5 that will potentially hit for 6 or 7 unblockable damage. The biggest strike against it is that blue isn't actually an artifact color in this set. So it's a little bit without a home. This is more for constructed. I'm not sure exactly where you're supposed to play this. I guess maybe splashing it because it's pretty easy to splash in a red-black affinity deck would be good. Or just playing this in like a red-blue deck that just has a couple red artifacts. And there are blue artifacts that you can get too. So I think Kappa Cannoneer is like a builder on A. If you can support this card, it's going to be one of the best cards in your deck.
It's awesome. But ward 4 is a huge pain in the butt.
I would basically look at like, can I reliably have 2 artifacts in play to help cast this, early-ish in the game? It doesn't need to be turn 3. You don't need to be like going super hard. But if you can cast this on turn 4 half the time and turn 5 half the time, still probably put this card in your deck.
I would, definitely. You get a 5/5 ward 4 that might be able to smash. What did you want to give it?
A builder on A. Like I think that it really does the trick when you cast it.
It is awesome. Yeah, when it goes. Last blue card is called Shadow of the Second Sun. It's 4 blue for an enchantment aura. This one's mythic rare. It enchants a player. And at the beginning of enchanted player's post-combat main phase, in other words, their second main phase, there is an additional... Is this real? There is an additional beginning phase after this phase. This is not real. Like, did you put this here as a joke, Luis?
It's a bit wild in terms
of like, and I'm not saying what because I think it's good or bad. I don't know what it does. Like, what does this card do?
I can explain it. It at the end of your second main phase, you untap everything, you have your upkeep, which probably doesn't do much, and you draw a card. But then it's their turn after that. So think of it as a wilderness reclamation that also draws you a card and untaps all your creatures too. It's not just your lands.
Or theirs. You can enchant them.
Well, yes, I guess
you don't recommend. Okay,
that I'm not in for. But
okay, so 6 mana to untap all my lands and draw an extra card a turn.
I mean, think of it in a deck with a bunch of instants. You cast this, immediately untap all your lands, draw a card. Yeah,
I mean, especially, and do I get it right away?
Right away. So you have to cast it in your first main phase, otherwise the trigger won't happen on your second. But yeah, I think that I think this is like another build around, like a build around B, maybe even A, like in a control deck that can get to survive till it gets to 6 and then have a bunch of interaction on 6. Like that actually sounds pretty good to me.
It does to me too. The key is that you get it the turn you cast it. If you have to spend 6 mana and don't get anything, it doesn't, and you have to wait till your next turn, that doesn't fly. But if you have a removal spell, a counter spell, something that you can cast after casting Shadow of the Second Sun, I could see it. That's a cool card. I despise is maybe not the right word, but like the templating, I can't even sort out what it does. Maybe that's part of the fun, but I like the card.
Yeah, the card is great.
Sweet. I would give it a build around A, right? Like if you properly build around this card will probably seal the deal for you. I mean, you start stacking up extra cards, you dump everything in your hand, you untap, you can still do stuff on their turn, etc.
Yeah,
I still don't know what it does, but
I think it's a pretty big game. Yeah.
All right, let's move to black. Our first card up is called Nethergoyf. We haven't had a Goyf in a while. This one's black for a Lurgoyf. It is mythic rare, and its power and toughness are star and 1+ star, and the power is equal to the number of card types among cards in your graveyard, and its toughness is equal to 1. That number plus 1. So what is it? It's card types?
Yeah.
So that's like regular Goyf? Okay.
It's Tarmogoyf, except it only looks at your graveyard. It does not look at theirs.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because of the escape ability where you can exile 4 different card types to escape it.
Play 2 in a black, exile any number of other cards from your graveyard with 4 or more types among them, and then you get it back.
Yeah, so an artifact creature would count for 2 of those, for example.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, for 1 mana.
And it's 1 mana?
Also, fetch lands go to your graveyard pretty easily in this set. So I would say that this card without support is often going to be a 1 mana 2/3 or 3/4 that maybe in the late game comes back once. That's fine. You're getting your money's worth, right? It's only 1 mana. And then in a deck that can reliably draw and discard or self-mill or what have you, you get a lot more than that. I would say Nethergoyf's a B.
You think so? I was going to say C+,
for 1 mana.
Yeah. I
guess think about if your opponent casts it and it's just on average a 3/4. And
if it's on average a 3/4, then I'm in. Yeah. I don't know if it's 2/3 or 3/4. It's probably 3/4. So
you get land not almost for free at this point.
It just have a creature and any other thing go. All right, B for Nethergoyf. Next is, how do I say this? Chthonian?
Chthonian Nightmare?
Chthonian Nightmare. It is 1 in a black for an enchantment at rare. It says when Chthonian Nightmare enters the battlefield, you get 3 energy, and you can pay X energy and sacrifice a creature and return Chthonian Nightmare to its owner's hand. That's all the cost. And then to do this, you get to return target creature card with mana value X from your graveyard to the battlefield at sorcery speed. This is a recurring Nightmare riff.
So It's a recurring nightmare. It spots you 3 energy every time you play it, but you have to pay energy equal to the cost of the creature you're bringing back. So if you're bringing back a more expensive one, you need to build up more energy. So it's a little weird because it's a black energy card in a color where there's not a whole lot of those.
Okay.
In fact, I think that might be the only energy card in black.
Okay.
But, it's at high rarity. Maybe there's a higher rarity one. And what you end up doing with it, though, is if you're looping creatures that cost 3 or less, it always breaks you even. If you're looping creatures that cost less than 3, you actually start generating energy, and you can get some good ETBs going. I have actually splashed this card in a Jeskai energy deck, and it was amazing. Like, it is a little awkward to splash because you actually want multiple black sources so that you can cast it multiple times a turn. But there's a lot of creatures with ETB abilities. Like, imagine the 2-mana 2/1 looter that gives you 3 energy or 2 energy on ETB. Like, you generate 3 off this, spend 2 to get that back, and it gets you 1 more. So now you're up to 3 energy. Then you replay this, now you have 6 energy. Like, you can really do things with that. And looping creatures with ETBs is just really strong.
Really powerful, yeah.
I think that Chthonian Nightmares is a pretty good card. Like, it's a build-around card. It's like a build-around B, but you can build a deck that this works in, I think, fairly easily.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they had to kind of nerf it a little bit shows you how powerful that ability is when you do get it going. Next is Emperor of Bones. This is 1 and a black for a 2/2 Skeleton Noble at rare. At the beginning of combat on your turn, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. And you can pay 1 and a black to adapt 2. Remember, that puts the 2+1/+1 counters on it if it didn't have any. And then it says, whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put onto it, put a creature card exiled with it onto the battlefield under your control with a finality counter on it. It gains haste, and you sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. And if a creature with a finality counter on it dies, it gets exiled, right?
Yeah, it goes away.
Yeah. So
this card's really good. It's 2 mana for a 2/2, eats a card out of the graveyard every turn, so it already gets you like a little bit of a graveyard hate. You can then spend 2 mana to make it into a 4/4. So that, I mean, 2 mana 2/2, spend 2 to make it to a 4/4 is not terrible. And then when you do that, you get to corpse dance a creature that you've exiled. So you could actually do it in the same turn. You play this, go to beginning of combat, exile a big creature, immediately pay the 2 before you've declared attackers, adapt this because it's instant speed, put the creature into play, gains haste, attack, sack at end of turn.
Wow, that's a big swing.
And every time this gets counters, you do it again, which you can only adapt it once, but there's a lot of ways to put counters on. So this is like strong at a baseline and even stronger with combos.
Wow.
I think Emperor of Bones is like an A-. You would just put this into any black deck and be extremely happy.
That seems really good. Next is Ripples of Undeath. This is 1 and a black for an enchantment at rare. It says at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, mill 3 cards. Oh boy. Then you may pay 1 mana and 3 life. If you do, put a card from among those cards in your hand. Wow. Man, this feels scary to me though, Luis. I'm not going to lie. Even if I get one of the cards, if I'm milling 3 and drawing a card every turn, that's 10% of my starting library every pre-combat main phase, including, I'm assuming I cast this. Oh, sorry. It's at the beginning of, okay. Yeah. So next turn it gets rolling. Yikes.
Yeah.
Is that scary?
It's still,
like, can I win the game before that mills me out?
You could definitely try. Like, it's, I think I'm a little bit too risky. I don't think that you're mostly going to want to do that.
I would be very worried about this. My stance would be that I would start with this at a low grade, a D, or maybe even an F. 3 life and a mana is a lot to get a card. You're going to get the best of 3 cards every single turn, but 3 life goes really quickly, and 3 cards per turn if you don't put together the things needed to win the game. Because remember, you're going to be drawing a lot of cards, but your bottleneck is going to be mana, and this thing taxes your mana as well if you want to keep the cards flowing. So I feel like you're going to be like, you're not missing land drops, you're hitting stuff, you're doing things, but your life total's falling and your library count is falling pretty quickly as well, where if your opponent just has a few answers at the right time, you might just lose to your own Ripples of Undeath, because it's not a May. Like your pre-combat main phase comes and you're milling 3.
Yeah. I mean, I think this puts too fast a clock on you. Like, I just don't think you can. I don't think you can really reliably kill them in time. And it's just, even if you can do that, like, it feels like this 3 life is a lot to pay. So,
right. I mean, a good way to look at this would also be quadrant 3 theory. Imagine a scenario where you're behind, right? This card is completely unplayable. Like, you can't just start paying 3 life and mana to try to dig yourself back out. You're going to die really, really, really quickly. I would give it an F. This is a type of card I'm like, show me.
You can't put this card in.
What about
I just don't think so.
Sorin of House Markov?
All right. So Sorin is a 2-mana 1/4 lifelink and has extort. So which means whenever you cast a spell, you can pay a white or black mana. And if you do, your opponent loses a life and you gain a life. So that by itself, I'm putting that card in any deck. Extort, if you didn't play during whatever set Ravnica said it was, Gatecrash, I think. Extort's a really good mechanic. Like,
really good.
You want cards with extort. Just being able to tack on 1 mana drain 1 on every spell you play is just awesome. So Sorin at 1/4 lifelink for 2 mana with extort is like a B.
Yeah,
but
and he's 1 in a black, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah. At the beginning of your post-combat main phase, if you gain 3 or more life this turn, you flip Sorin into I clicked on the wrong thing. Sorin Ravenous Neonate, which is a legendary planeswalker, starts with 3 loyalty, still has the extort ability, +2 make a food, -1 Sorin deals damage equal to the amount of life you gain to any target, and so the turn you flip him, you know you can do 3. And -6 gain control of target creature, becomes a vampire, and it gets lifelink counter if you have a white permanent other than Sorin or that creature.
Wow. Nice.
Yeah, so I mean, Sorin is the real deal. Like, I like this card a lot without the flip ability, and the flip ability isn't impossible. If you can attack with Sorin and play 2 spells, that's 3 life. But more often, I think it's going to be like, can you gain life from another spell or effect that gains some life? Or maybe you can make this a little bit bigger, though. When you flip it, you don't get to use those counters or that buff anymore, of course.
Right.
But then you flip it, and you're just immediately like, -1, go to 2 loyalty, kill your thing, deal 3. And then +2 make a food, and then every other turn you can just sack the food, then -1, and you can just kind of flip back and forth.
There's a certain type of person in the world that's their dream, right? Just making food, pinging you for 1 off of extort, prolonging the game. The boa constrictor.
BK had a good point. It's funny that Sorin makes food when vampires don't eat, but they made a food token that's like,
I heard him say that on your guys' review.
Like, obviously about to get eaten by a vampire.
I was like, what is he talking about? I'm like, oh, I get it. Right. Vampire sitting down for a feast. It's like, well, that's not really what's on the menu, but okay.
Yeah.
How good is Sorin?
I'd probably give it like a B+.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's not going to be one of the best cards in your deck, but it'd be pretty good.
Yeah, definitely B+ for Sorin of House Markov. Next is Necrodominance. This is black for a legendary enchantment. It's mythic rare. It says, skip your draw step. At the beginning of your end step, you may pay any amount of life. If you do draw that many cards, your maximum hand size is 5. And if a card or token would be put into your graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. Is this a fixed?
This is enough.
Okay, not fixed. F for Necrodominance. Don't play it.
Just too many black symbols. It's not like you're losing a card every turn. So like, because you're skipping your draw step, so you have to pay extra life to make up for it. It's just not good.
Next is a one that's just remarkably hung on in cube. It's Ophiomancer, 2 and a black for a 2/2 human shaman. And at the beginning of each upkeep, if you control no snakes, you create a 1/1 black snake creature token with Death Touch. Man, this is one of those, this is like an all-time classic for you read it and you go, oh, okay. But you play it and you go, oh, okay. Like, this card does work. It seems to hold its own at almost any level. It's really strong.
Yeah, I actually just recently played against it in the Arena Cube, and it was like, oh, wow, yeah, that card's good. I mean, while this card is in play, they can never attack on the ground because your snake just blocks.
Yep.
And if they kill Ophiomancer, well, you're up a 1/1 Death Toucher.
That's right. And then they still can't attack. And of course, they can't start killing the snake because it just comes right back again. This also works very well with creatures entering the battlefield, and particularly with sacrifice outlets.
Yeah, I think that the Ophiomancer is just a great card in any deck, basically. So
B plus for a
I,
Theomancer, A minus.
I would give it. I would give it an A minus. Like I would
It's
just give it
that
a flat
good.
A. Like just put it in your deck, and you're immune to attacks on the ground, or you're 2 for winning them. And if you have like sacrifice stuff, like that's great too.
Right. It just doesn't ask anything of you. Next, another one that's excellent. One of the best sweepers of all time. It's Toxic Deluge. It's 2 and a black for a sorcery at rare. As an additional cost to cast it, you have to pay X life, but all creatures get minus X until end of turn. So however much life you paid, that's how many they go. I've paid 15 to kill Emrakul with this thing. Like this is one of the most flexible sweepers ever. It's only 3 mana and it's just a single black, so 2 and a black. And you can tailor it to the board, and you can even tailor it to the board post combat in some scenarios too.
Yeah, I would say that Toxic Deluge gets an A as well.
I agree.
Like super flexible, super powerful, super cheap, splashable. Like with all the fetch lands in this format, if I'm like blue-green Eldrazi or even blue-green-red Eldrazi and I see this pack 3, I am taking it because this is like the perfect card for that kind of deck.
Totally.
So,
and you might be worried about the life loss. And yes, it is real. And there are times when you can't cast Toxic Deluge and you just lose. But almost every time when you cast it, it's a devastating card and you're very happy to have paid the life for it. I would give it an A. Next is Warren Soul Trader. This is 2 and a black for a 3/3 zombie goblin wizard at rare. It says pay 1 life, sacrifice another creature, and for that you get a treasure token.
I mean, 3 mana 3/3 that gives you a 0 mana sack outlet is kind of nice because like it's surprisingly good to just be able to sack your creatures in response to them targeting them. There's so many spells that give you additional effects.
And treasures definitely count.
Yeah, treasures are good. I would say this is like a C. Like you can put this in most black decks with a bunch of creatures and it's going to be okay. I don't really think there's like a huge engine going on here, but I think it's a fine card.
Yeah, pair it up with your Ophiomancer and go ham. Next is Flare of Malice. This is 2 black for an instant, and it has the alternate casting cost, and it's a rare, so you can sack a black non-token creature to cast it for free. It says each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker with the greatest mana value among creatures and planeswalkers they control. These type of cards are generally very strong. You know, the correlation between the most expensive or the card with the most power and what you want to kill is almost a 2 circles Venn diagram. Like it is very rare that you don't want to kill their most expensive thing.
Yeah. I think this card is totally fine to just cast. And unlike some of the other flares, this is going to be good almost anytime you want to cast it. So I can really easily see you just sacking a creature that's going to die anyway. Like they target your, 2/3 burrowing badger, the black-green like gold card that's really good. They're like, okay, on turn 5, they're like, okay, kill your thing. And you're just like, all right, sack it to the flare, kill your biggest thing. Like you got a 0 mana kill spell. So I think Flare looks like a B, just a very solid kill spell that you'll play for free to good effect sometimes.
Yeah, this looks like the best of that cycle so far. Next is Shilgengar, Sire of Famine. This is 3 black for a 6/6 legendary Elder Demon. It's just a regular rare though, and it does have flying, so 5 mana 6/6 flyer. Has activated ability, sacrifice another creature. If you do, you get a blood token. If you sacrificed an angel this way, you create a number of blood tokens equal to the toughness instead. Wow, that's a major upgrade. You either get just 1 blood token or like 3 or 4 or something. And remember, blood tokens are 1 tap sack, discard a card, draw a card, artifacts. And then it has another activated ability, which is 3 hybrid black-white mana. So you can pay white, black, or any combination in between. And it says, and sacrifice 6 blood tokens to return each creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. Those creatures are vampires in addition to their other types. So let's start off. 5 mana 6/6 flying in a set like this, still great, right?
Yeah, I would. It's funny. I wouldn't say great, but still solid.
Okay, so like a B.
Yeah, I think it's like around a B.
Okay, and card. Then what about the first ability of sacrificing creatures to turn them into blood tokens, and God forbid you have an angel and you get to just, pop off. Normally, I'm assuming there's not that many angels in the set. You're going to be turning creatures into blood tokens. How good is that?
It's
about the same as a Soul Trader.
No, like you're not really getting much out of each individual sacrifice.
Right.
But what you are getting is when you get to 6, you get to get everything back.
So it gives you this like goalpost to aim for. How hard is it to hit 6? I mean, you're not going to sack 6 individual creatures very often, right?
Well, if you're at like 3 blood tokens, I could see at some point just going, all right, just immediately sack my other 3 creatures, then just pay the mana and bring everything back. Like that doesn't sound crazy to me.
Sure.
I don't think that you're going to play this card with that part in mind a ton, but that is a very real aspect of the card. It probably bumps it to like a B+.
Okay.
Like the later in the game you can go, the better that ability becomes and the more likely you're going to be able to like actually do something really sick with it.
Yeah. I mean, to me, this seems like one of those cards that you play it on 5 and then you're thinking about sacrificing stuff and collecting blood tokens. But in the meantime, if they don't just kill it, you just kill them. Like it's a 6/6 flyer. Like that's bigger than everything at 5, right? So like you're just going to smash them if they don't kill this. So I really wonder how often you're going to actually be able to get to the 6 blood tokens anyway. I assume it'll be a rarity because the game, either this thing will die or you will have killed your opponent before that happens. That's not a complaint. I mean, it's at least a B+. I mean, this card looks awesome to me.
Yeah, I was going to say it's actually just around a B. Like, I think it's pretty good.
5 mana 6/6 flyer still has to be like a real house. I guess if the removal's really good, then maybe it just dies too often or whatever. But next is Crabomination. 4 black for a 5/5 crab demon at rare. It has emerge from artifact 5 black. So it says you may cast this spell by sacrificing an artifact and paying the emerge cost reduced by that artifact's mana value. And then it says when Crabomination enters the battlefield, target opponent exiles the top card of their library, a card at random from their graveyard, and a card at random from their hand. You may cast a spell from among the cards exiled this way without paying its mana cost.
So ignore the emerge part completely. 6 mana, you exile a card out of their hand, and you have choice of one of 3 graveyard, hand, and library to cast. So you get to just cast one of those spells, whatever the best card is there, for free. Amazing card. Like,
wait, so you're just getting a card from their hand like straight up? Like a random card from their hand just goes away?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Wow. So you're hitting their resources and then you're going to get one of those cards for free that could be anything? That's a great place to put 6 mana. I'm in.
Yeah, this card's unbelievable. It's one of the best cards in the set. I think the Crabomination is honestly an A+. Like,
wow.
You just your 6-drop eats a random card out of their hand and then casts the best of 3 cards. Like, that's just huge. And then let's circle back to the emerge from artifact thing. In a black-red affinity deck, sometimes you'll even get to cast this for like 3 mana or something. You'll sack like with the 2/1 flyer for 4 and just get like a nice little discount. But honestly, if I'm playing black, I'm not passing this card even if I have 0 artifacts in my entire deck.
That is a disgusting Magic card. That is awesome. Crabomination A+. That card's awesome. Last black card is called Keurig, Son of Yawgmoth. This is 4 and 3 black Phyrexian mana, so you can either play 2 life or black mana for each of those. It's a legendary Phyrexian horror minion at rare, and it is a 2/2. It's a 7 mana 2/2. It does have lifelink, and for each black mana in a cost, you may pay 2 life rather than pay that mana. So it turns all of the black mana symbols on your cards into Phyrexian black mana. And then it says, whenever you cast a black spell, put a number of put a +1/+1 counter on Keurig, Son of Yawgmoth. 1?
This is too fiddly. Like,
1?
You can play this on turn 4 by paying 6 life, and then you have a 2/2 lifelink, and then next turn you like play 2 spells because you paid some more life, and you can just like, oh yeah, I'm doing it. But I don't really think
I'm not doing it.
That this card is going to work very well. Like,
no way. I'm sure there's some crazy stuff you can do with it, but especially if you're mono black or can gain life or whatever. But nah, man, I'm not messing with Keurig, Son of Yawgmoth. I don't think.
Yeah, I think it looks like a build around, D, where like I don't really think you're going to actually and end up doing this. So
Yeah. Let's go to the next color, which is red. Our first card is called Party Thrasher. It's 1 and a red for a 1/4 Lizard Wizard. It's rare. It says non-creature spells you cast from exile have Convoke, so you can tap creatures to help pay the cost. And at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you may discard a card. If you do, exile the top 2 cards of your library, then choose one of them. You may play that card this turn. Nice.
Yeah, I mean, 2 mana, 1/4, and then you get to discard a card to play the best of 2, which is kind of nice. And you can also, if you're hitting non-creatures, you can tap it plus your other creature to help pay for it. Pretty solid little 2-drop. I would say toughness. B on the Party Thrasher.
I like B for Party Thrasher. You're not missing land drops, and you got 4 toughness creatures. Tough to kill. Next is called Power Balance. And by the way, just the artwork is like already like I don't want to have anything to do with this card. It just reminds me of Counterbalance. It's red for an enchantment at rare, and it says whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may reveal the top card of your library. If you do, you may cast that card without paying its mana cost if the 2 spells have the same mana value. That's a lot harder to set up than Counterbalance, at least.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's yeah, you don't have Sensei's top is the thing. It's exactly the same difficulty as Counterbalance straight up. But yes, of course, we don't have ways to actually do this.
No, I misunderstood. Yeah, that's interesting. It's just reversed. Okay, I gotcha.
It's reversed, but yeah, it's an F. You can't really rely on this.
No. Next is Ral, Monsoon Mage. Oh, Ral's back. 1 and a red for a 1/3 legendary human wizard at Mythic Rare. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Just snapshot here. Is that the blue-red thing? Like, what are we referencing? Is that a supported archetype, I guess, is reducing the cost of instants and sorceries? Or is it random bonus?
Not specifically. Like, there's not like a cast 5 spells deck exactly.
Okay. And then whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell during your turn, flip a coin. If you lose the flip, Ral deals 1 damage to you. If you win the flip, you may exile Ral. If you do, return him to the battlefield transformed under his owner's control, and he becomes Ral Leyline Prodigy. This is a 2 loyalty planeswalker. Static ability says Ral enters the battlefield with an additional loyalty counter on him for each instant and sorcery spell you've cast this turn. And it was at least 1, right? Yeah. So you just to flip it, you had to have cast at least 1. So you're actually getting 3 loyalty minimum here from Ral. 3 abilities plus 1 until your next turn. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So I guess you have to earn that back again. -2, Ral deals 2 damage divided as you choose among 1 or 2 targets. Draw a card if you control a blue permanent other than Ral. Sure. And then -8 is exile the top 8 cards of your library. You may cast instant and sorcery spells from among them this turn without paying their mana costs. All right. So, this is extremely all in on instants and sorceries. Does this set support that? And if it doesn't, is this guy worth playing in the absence of that being a primary archetype?
I don't think this is supported quite enough. Like, I could see some decks that kind of end up here, but for the most part, I don't think you can rely on playing the 2 spells needed to flip this most of the time. Well, half the time you can flip it with just 1 spell, 3/4 of the time you flip it with 2, et cetera, et cetera.
Not you, I mean, you're going to have to cast 4 spells.
Right. Right. The -2 ability is pretty good. The -8 ability is probably not that easy to use. Mm-hmm. And overall, Ral looks like a build around C where, like, I think there's something here, but most of the time I don't think you're going to end up really getting to use this card as much as you would like.
Yeah, Ral looks like an industry plant to me. I think it's going to be used in other formats, not this one as much. Next is Cursed Mirror. This is 2 and a red for an artifact at rare. It taps for red. And it says, as it enters the battlefield, you may have it become a copy of any creature on the battlefield until end of turn, except it has haste. So you're getting a 1-shot hasty copy that then turns into a mana rock of all things?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that's kind of a shame is all the Eldrazi are on cast triggers, so you casting this and copying their Eldrazi doesn't get you that. Mm-hmm. And I think it would take a very specific set of cards before I'd want to play this. It looks kind of like a D to me. Like a 3-mana mana rock isn't good, and a one-shot clone better be really strong for me to want to go out of my way to play that card. So I don't think this is a card I'm really that interested in.
Yeah, and you can't block with it, right? No. Like you clone. Yeah, I agree. Next is Detective's Phoenix. This is 2 and a red for a 2/2 enchantment creature Phoenix at rare. It has Bestow for red and Collect Evidence 6. It has Flying and Haste. It says enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has Flying and Haste. And you may cast Detective's Phoenix from your graveyard using its Bestow ability. We loved this one.
Yeah, I mean, this card is just a great card. Like, I think that awesome. Detective's Phoenix is an A.
Yeah.
Like, Collect Evidence 6 is not 6 cards. It's like 2 cards. Right. You know, it just has to have a cost of up to 6. And putting this onto a creature for 1 mana, giving it +2/+2 flying and haste. When this card's in your opponent's graveyard, you just feel like you're about to die all the time.
Totally. Super scary card. Would you give it an A?
Yeah, I would give Detective's Phoenix an A.
What about Flare of Duplication? Does it get an A?
So this is the red flare. It's 1 red. You know, it's an instant. You can sack a non-token red creature rather than pay its cost. And then it copies target instant or sorcery spell, and you can choose new targets for the copy. So you can target their spells. So if they cast a good spell, you can go boom, you know, copy it. You don't get to counter it or whatever. And you can target your own spells for no mana, which does make effects like this a bit stronger than they normally are, because like usually you have to like set it up and then do it, you know, where you have like a lot of mana. Here you could technically just go like tap out for a big spell, sack a creature to copy it. I just don't know what deck it's working in that you have such good big instants and sorceries and or red creatures lying around to copy with. So
what about this use case? They target my creature with a removal spell. I sacrifice that creature, copy their removal spell, aim it at their thing. Is that a blowout? Is that even money for me? Is that great?
You're right. You're ahead a little bit. It's like a 2 for 2. They're down a removal spell and a creature. You're down your creature plus the flare.
And
but they spent
the
mana and you did not. So I think that's a pretty big deal.
Because that will feel like a blowout, but they're going to be targeting your best thing. You're not sacrificing your worst thing in this case. You're sacrificing your best thing. Okay. So would you even put this in your deck? Like, you're playing red, or you like, I got a flare, 7th pick or whatever, I'm including in my deck? I mean, my assumption would be no. Like, unless you had like a really strong reason.
Yeah, this looks like a sideboard B to me. Like, it does not look like a card I'm itching to play, but the scenario you discussed, I think is a pretty real one of they target your creature, you sack it, copy their spell, kill their creature. You spent no mana, they spent mana. That's a good deal.
Big tempo swing. Next card is a card that I know you're itching to play, because I am. It's Lelia, the Blade Reforged. One of the cards that was kind of the harbinger of changes to the cube. It's 2 and a red for a 2/2 legendary spirit warrior with haste. And it says, whenever it attacks, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. And whenever 1 or more cards are put into exile from your library and or your graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on Lelia. And that's for each, right?
So yes, it's supposed to be 1 or more. So like if you exile 4 cards at once, it's just 1.
Right.
But the way Cascade works on like the Amped Raptor, for example, it triggers 1 per card because it is 1 by 1. I couldn't really tell you the reason why that is, but that is how it works. So like the Altisword, a 7 mana card, will give you a ton of +1/+1 counters. But even baseline, Leila comes down as a 3/3 attacking immediately. You probably don't play that card this turn, because if you tapped out for Leila on turn 3, for example. But then the next turn, you attack as a 4/4. If you flip a land, you just play it. If you flip a 4 or less cost spell, you can probably play it. And then you're just drawing cards and getting value every single turn thereafter. Like, Lelia just gets completely out of control and doesn't need anything. Like, doesn't ask a single thing of you besides put this card in your deck.
Totally.
So I think Lelia is awesome. We've like you mentioned, we played with this card in Cube. We know it's good.
Yeah.
And I would say Lelia is an A-. Like, look, there's going to be some boards, they have a 4/4 out. You can't attack with Lelia, but you could set it up to maybe kill their thing and then attack, or play a pump spell. And on an empty board, or if Lelia gets an unopposed first attack in, like you just end up winning the game so quickly.
This thing just snowballs. Yeah, and it does both. It kills the opponent while also bolstering your hand effectively at the same time. I would just give an A to Lelia. Like that's got to be one
that
of the
works
best
for
cards.
me.
Next is Wheel of Potential. This is 2 in a red for a sorcery at rare. It says you get 3 energy, then you pay X energy. Each player may exile their hand and draw X cards. If X is 7 or more, you may play lands you own exiled this way until the end of your next turn. Sorry, play cards you own exiled this way until the end of your next turn.
So let me kind of explain this because it's really hard to parse this on first read. Mm-hmm. If you pay 7 energy, both players can just exile their hand to draw 7 cards, or 7 or more, if you paid more. And if you paid 7 or more, you can then play cards from your original hand that you exiled until your next turn.
Oh, I see.
Until the end of your next turn. But you also still have to pay mana for them. This card is terrible. It's not a good card. It is an F. You just don't want to put this card in your deck.
Okay. F for Wheel of Potential. I guess it didn't live up to its potential. Aether Revolt is next. It's 2 red for an enchantment. It is rare, and it has Revolt as long as a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn. If a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. And whenever you get 1 or more energy, Aether Revolt deals that much damage to any target. BDM texted me and said he killed somebody with just this thing.
Yeah, I had this card on the early access event, and it was completely obscene. All your energy cards turn into lightning bolts, damage equal to the amount of energy to generate, except if you can get Revolt, which is exceedingly easy, you then end up dealing plus 2. It also just you'd be surprised at how many sources around tap into the extra plus 2 damage. Unstable Amulet does extra damage. Obviously, any burn spell you play, it is extremely easy. So this is a build around A. Obviously, you have to put a lot of cards in your deck that work with it. Does not seem challenging to do so. And when you do, you get amply rewarded. That's what the build around grade's for. So build around A for Aether Revolt, which brings us to our last red card, Ashling Flame Dancer. It's 2 red for a 4/4 legendary elemental shaman at Mythic Rare. You don't lose unspent red mana as steps and phases end. Minorly powerful. It just means if you ever don't tap out, or you'll see Ashling generates mana, you get to kind of bank that mana. Mm-hmm. But if Ashling dies, it all goes away. Mm-hmm. Also has Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, discard a card, then draw a card. Not optional. You have to do this. If this is the second time this ability has resolved, Ashling deals 2 damage to each opponent and all their creatures. If it's the third time, add 4 red mana.
And that's this turn, resolve this turn?
Yes.
Okay. Each opponent, and then if it's the third time, you can generate 4 red mana that you get to hang on to as well. Wow.
So
this does just, if you cast an instant or sorcery, you're already going down this road. Wow.
And then here's the thing that's also maybe a little confusing if you haven't played with the card, which I now have, and I was confused by it. Mm-hmm. The rummaging ability happens each time. It just gets additional riders on top of it.
Oh, okay. So it's not that and then the next thing. It's that and then that plus the next thing. Wow. This seems really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, this card is pretty strong. And if you can cast a spell as the last card in your hand, you'll discard nothing, then draw a card.
Oh, that's really nice. Okay. Yeah, I'm in for Ashling. I mean, this seems very strong. How good is the fact that your red mana doesn't empty?
It's not very good in the dark, but it actually works pretty nicely with Ashling because one of the things you want to do here is try to build up a bunch of spells in the same turn. And Ashling does do that pretty nicely when you have a bunch of extra mana.
What grade?
I would give Ashling a B. It's a good card. I mean, it's a 4-mana card that your opponent sometimes is going to try to kill. Yeah. Because it's got a lot of, not sometimes. They will try to kill it. Yeah. And it's overall it can have some pretty high end, but I would say in general it's not going to end up doing the thing every single time, though obviously it threatens to do so. That's why your opponents will try to deal with it.
All right, let's move on to green. Our first green card is Grist Voracious Larva. This is green for a 1/2 legendary insect at Mythic Rare. It's got Death Touch, so 1 mana, 1/2 Death Touch. And whenever Grist or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it entered from your graveyard or you cast it from your graveyard, you may pay green. If you do, exile Grist and return it transformed into Grist the Plague Swarm, which is a legendary Grist that's 3 loyalty and it has 3 abilities +1. Create a 1/1 black and green insect creature token, then mill 2 cards. Put a death touch counter on the token if a black card was milled this way. You can -2 it right away to destroy an artifact or enchantment, and you can -6 it if you can manage to get that loyalty up to. For each creature card in your graveyard, create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a 1/1 black and green insect.
So the starting point of green for a 1/2 death touch means you should just put this in your deck because that's fine.
That's totally fine.
And having a creature enter the battlefield from your graveyard or cast from your graveyard isn't going to come up a ton of times, but it will come up. Like that can happen. And
then you pay the extra green.
Quest for the Gravelord, like the enchantment that like lets you animate from any graveyard, like can do that, for example. Mm-hmm. And then when you flip Grist, it is pretty good. You get to make a bunch of tokens, you get to destroy artifacts or enchantments, and maybe you can ultimate, though I don't know how often that's actually going to happen.
Yeah.
So I like Grist well enough. I think it's a solid card.
Yeah, I like it too.
I would give it like a C+. Like you're just not going to flip it that often, I think, is the main drawback.
Right.
It's like it's not very easy to flip.
And if you're only doing the front side, it is a little underpowered, though still playable. Next is Sylvan Safekeeper. This is green for a 1/1 human wizard. It's rare. Has an activated ability of sacrifice a land. And if you do that, target creature you control gains Shroud until end of turn, which means it can't be the target of spells or abilities. There's no way, right? Like,
I think this is a sideboard card. I would typically not be looking to main deck this one.
Yeah, it's just such a huge cost. At any point in the early to mid game, sacrificing a land is like kind of devastating. I would give Sylvan Safekeeper an F. I just assume you're not going to play it unless you have a really specific reason to do so.
Yeah, I think it's a sideboard card. I think against a deck with a bunch of removal, you could make this as a pretty good way to protect stuff. But yes, mostly you're not going to play it.
Birthing Ritual is next. It is 1 and a green for an enchantment at Mythic Rare. It says the beginning of your end step. If you control a creature, look at the top 7 cards of your library. Then you may sacrifice a creature. If you do, you may put a creature card with mana value X or less from among those cards onto the battlefield, where X is 1 plus a sacrificed creature's mana value, and you put the rest on the bottom in a random order.
Yeah, this is an F. Way too many moving pieces. And it also, above all that, requires you to invest a card in this and you don't get that card back. You are upgrading creatures if it works, but it's just not going to work that often. So.
No, and if you ever miss or even break even on the mana value, it's like you put a card into this, like you just be kicking yourself for that. F. Next is Fanatic of Ronus. This is 1 and a green for a 1/4 snake druid at rare. It taps to add green. It's got Ferocious. It taps to add 4 green mana, but you can only activate it that if you have a creature with power 4 or greater, which is what Ferocious is. And then it also has Eternalize for 2 green, so you can pay 2 green and exile it from your graveyard, and you can create a token that's a copy of it, except for it's a 4/4 black zombie snake druid with no mana cost, and you can do that only at sorcery speed.
Great card. 2 mana, 1/4 that taps for a green. I'm in.
Yeah.
Oh, sometimes I can tap it for 4 green in my Eldrazi deck and just cast 10 drops. Great. Oh, I can pay 4 to bring it back as a 4/4, which now conveniently taps for 4 green.
Right.
Like this card just kind of has it all. I would say Fanatic of Ronus is like an A-.
That's
you're
awesome.
You're just really happy with this card.
Yeah, every deck that plays it's going to love it. What does Springheart Nantuko do?
1 and a green for a 1/1 enchantment creature, instant monk at rare. It has bestow of 1 and a green, so you can put it on a creature as an aura. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1. It also has the ability of landfall. Whenever a land enters a battlefield under your control, you can pay 1 and a green if Springheart Nantuko is attached to a creature. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that creature. If you didn't create a token this way, you make a 1/1 insect. So by itself, it's 2 mana for a 1/1 landfall, make a 1/1. That's a card I would just put in my deck. Great card. And if you bestow it, which is what you want to do, now every land you play lets you pay 2 to copy the creature it's on. That's incredibly good.
Wait, so but it has to be bestowed onto something to get the one
Make
ones?
the copy.
To
No,
make
the one
copy.
it always makes
Gotcha.
the one if you don't make a copy. You can only make a copy if it's bestowed. But think about the play pattern of turn 4, play a random 4-mana creature. Turn 5, bestow this on that, play a land, immediately make a copy. You're now up a copy of this creature that costs 3 or 4 mana. And then if your opponent kills that creature, you still have this in play making 1/1s.
Wow. And when you make that copy, it just sits there like you just get one?
Yeah. You just got it. You've succeeded. So
wow.
I think that Spring Hurt Nantuko is fantastic. I would give this one an A.
Yeah.
There's no real like tempo loss here because you're just going to play this and bestow this and make a copy of the creature immediately in, most case scenarios. And then you're already up a copy of whatever creature you had. Plus, if they deal with the creature, you then get a 1/1 token maker.
That makes more.
At very little cost for no mana. It's just landfall, make a 1/1. So
this is a classic high floor, high ceiling type card. Next is Branching Evolution. This is 2 and a green for an enchantment at rare. It says if 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put onto a creature you control, twice that many +1/+1 counters are put on that creature instead. So now we've got a very, very narrow, but looks like pretty powerful build around here.
Yeah, I mean, this card is clearly a build around. It's not a card you can put in your deck unless you're ready to use it. But it is powerful. Whenever you adapt, you get twice as many counters.
Yeah.
It doesn't double trigger their abilities, sadly, because it replaces.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of things that give counters in overall. I would say it's a build around B. I had it once and it was it was okay.
Yeah.
It was pretty threatening when it was in play, but you can still, even in a deck built around it, run the risk of like drawing it off the top and having no more things left, or they killed the 2 things you played with it and now you're kind of down a card because it doesn't do anything on its own.
Next up is Eladamri Corvectol. What is a Corvectol? Is that like anyway?
I think that's just like a title.
A title? Yeah, okay.
Or something like that. I don't even know, really.
1 green for a 3/3 legendary elf warrior at Mythic Rare. And it says, you may look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may cast creature spells from the top of your library. Well, that's already pretty good. And then you can pay green, tap it, and tap 2 untapped creatures you control to reveal a card from your hand or the top card of your library. If you reveal a creature card this way, put it onto the battlefield, and you can activate this only during your turn, although at any time during your turn.
So 3 mana, 3/3 lets you cast creatures off the top, and then once you've got a bunch of creatures, which this kind of leads you down that path, you then get to start playing them for free. Seems pretty good.
That seems very good to me.
I mean,
you could do some busted things with this, right?
Oh, certainly. I mean, you can put a 10-drop into play.
Like from your hand?
Or the top of your deck, yeah.
So like if you curve into this on turn 4, you could just...
You'd have to have 2 other creatures, which is not the easiest thing in the world, but yeah, you could.
But so like if you play a 2-drop this, then the next turn play a 3-drop, play a forest, and then do the thing, like you're doing it, right?
Oh yeah, that all checks out.
And you could just put an eldrazi in or whatever. We know that there's like a slight ding on that, right? Because you are just putting these right onto the battlefield. You're not casting them.
Yeah, but they're still pretty big.
Yeah, but they're still 8/8 or whatever. Okay, so what would you give Eladamri?
Probably like a B+.
Yeah,
like I would say it's a pretty solid card.
I like that it does 2 distinctly different things, but does them both quite well. Next is Flare of Cultivation. This is 1 green for a sorcery at rare. It says you may sacrifice a non-token creature rather than pay its cost. Green creature, I should say. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. Reveal those cards. Put 1 onto the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand, and then shuffle. So we've got Cultivate, but a little harder to cast if you're going to cast it, or you could just free it.
Yeah, I think the fact that it costs 1 green to cast takes away so much value of the actual just casting of Cultivate.
So does.
You could just, if you just draw a forest and 2 islands and you can't cast this, it's just such a disaster. So I would say that, and then I don't think sacking a creature does anything here. Like this isn't constructed. You're not playing Arboreal Grazer. You just can't do that sort of thing. So I would just give Flare of Cultivation an F. I don't believe in this card.
That doesn't make sense to me. Next is 6, which is 2 and a green For a 2/4 legendary creature Tree Folk. This is 6 of red and 6, by the way. This is a rare. It's got reach. And whenever 6 attacks, you mill 3 cards. You may put a land card from among them into your hand. Wow, that's nice. And as long as it's your turn, non-land permanent cards in your graveyard have retrace, which means you may cast permanent cards from your graveyard by discarding a land card in addition to paying their other costs. Jeez. 3 mana, 2/4 reach that like draws you lands and then also gives everything retrace in your yard or non-land permanents. Dang.
Yeah. I mean, when this attacks, it probably draws you a card, right? A land, but it also lets you exchange lands for spells or permanent spells.
Yeah.
And even if the attacks aren't good with this, you can just sit back on it and just all your lands become, cards you can cast instead.
Okay. Yeah, I like it. What do you want to give 6? Is that an A?
I would
A
probably give it
minus?
like a B+.
B+? Yeah, B+. I like B+ for 6. Last green card is Primal Prayers. It is 2 green for an enchantment at rare. It says when it enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy counters. You may cast creature spells with mana value 3 or less by paying an energy rather than paying their mana costs. Is that how I read that? By paying 1 energy?
Yeah.
Okay. And then if you cast a spell way.
By paying, 1 energy rather than their mana costs.
Okay. And
so
then
it lets you play 2 things this way.
Mm-hmm. And then if you cast a spell this way, you may cast it as though it had flash as well. Okay, but it's not replacing itself, right? It's giving you like flexibility on casting as far as timing and what you're paying for the things. Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, this doesn't look good to me.
And it's also like one of the only green energy cards.
Yeah. So no,
I would say F for Primal Prayers.
Yeah, I'd say you need to pray for it because it's not going to make it anybody's deck. That moves us to gold. First card up is called Genku Future Shaper. This is 2 blue-white for a 2/5 legendary Moonfolk Wizard at rare. And it says whenever another non-token permanent you control leaves the battlefield, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn, create a creature token with those characteristics. And here's the choices. You can get a 2/2 white fox with vigilance, a 1/2 blue Moonfolk with flying, a 1/1 black rat with lifelink. And then it also has an activated ability, 3 blue-white, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control.
So this card, this card will trigger off of your fetch lands, which is like the main thing you want to do with it, where you play this on turn 5 and sack a fetch land, immediately make a 2/2. You usually make it like probably 2/2 into lifelink or into 1/2, but it kind of depends on the board. Mm-hmm. There's reasons to make, any and or all of them. And overall, I think this card is really, really good. Like you get to make some tokens, and then paying the 5 to put a counter on each creature you control is obviously great once you've made a bunch of tokens.
Totally. That's a potential game winner, especially in blue-white. Yeah, Genku looks awesome.
Yeah, this just looks like a bomb to me.
Yeah. Would you go up into the A range? You said you felt like Revolt was pretty easy to do, right?
Yeah, really easy.
Okay, then yeah. Yeah, I would say A for Genku Future Shaper then. What about Psychic Frog?
Psychic Frog is awesome. It's blue-black for a 1/2 frog at rare. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player or a planeswalker, draw a card. You can discard a card to put a +1/+1 counter on it. Ooh. And you can exile 3 cards from your graveyard to give it flying until end of turn.
Wow.
But like, imagine you cast this on turn 2, they play a 2-drop, you just attack. What are they going to do?
Yeah, there's no way they can block.
So you have a 2-mana, basically unblockable 1/2 that draws you a card and it hits them. And then later in the game, when they're actually, they do have stats to block, it just goes to the air because you probably filled up your graveyard by then. And can sometimes just hit them for like 5 damage or something if you just kind of want to move all in. Psychic Frog looks incredible. Just looks like awesome. An A to me. It's a card that if you cast it on turn 2 will win you the game so often.
Yeah, they need to have removal and it needs to be effective against this type of thing. That's awesome. Next is Imskir Iron Eater. This is 6 black-red for a 5/5 legendary demon. It's rare. It has affinity for artifacts. And when it enters the battlefield, you draw X cards and you lose X life, where X is half the number of artifacts you control, rounded down. And then you can pay 3 in a red and sacrifice an artifact to have Imskir Deal damage equal to the sacrificed artifact's mana value to any target. Okay, sure. What cost do I need to get this to be happy? It starts off at 8, but Affinity does mean it's cheaper.
If you played this for 6 mana, you'd be like a 6 mana 5/5, draw a card, lose a life, and then still has that like fling ability, which is kind of nice. And
so build around.
Yeah, it is rounded down. So if you have 3 artifacts in play, this costs 5 mana and you draw 1 instead. Mm-hmm. I think that overall, this is a great card to put in black-red, which is the black-red theme's Affinity. It's really not hard to imagine being able to use this nicely. And I think that it's like a builder on A, where like if you can cast this on turn 4 because you just went 1-drop artifact into 2 cheap artifacts into another artifact, and just like, bam, you're just going to win the game a lot of the time. It's a very strong card.
Start throwing stuff around. So build around A for Imskir. Next is Roshin Roaring Prophet. This is 2 red-green for a 4/4 legendary giant shaman at rare. And when it enters the battlefield, you mill 6 cards. You may put a card with X in its mana cost from among them into your hand. And by the way, that is not optional. You are milling the 6 cards regardless. You can tap it and reveal any number of cards with X in their mana cost from your hand. You add 2 colorless mana for each card revealed this way, and you can spend the mana only on costs that contain X. This seems bad to me.
Yeah, it's got no text. It's 2 red-green, 4/4, no text. That's a D. It's just not good in this day and age.
Kudo King Among Bears is green-white for a 2/2 legendary bear at rare. It says other creatures have base power and toughness 2/2 and are bears in addition to their other types. So this is, meant to be with a modified deck, I assume. So your bears are bigger than their bears.
Yeah, I mean
that does seem kind of good, actually. They get to keep all their other techs, though, right? Like it only modifies their toughness and power, and it adds bear, but like they're still flying, they still have activated abilities and stuff.
Yeah, they don't lose abilities, but it does make everything into into just bears.
I don't know. What you tell me. This seems kind of mediocre to me. I mean, it has a broad sweeping effect on the game that should matter, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think that it's probably like a B. If you're just in green white, you can it's just 2 mana 2/2 with like some pretty nice upside. But I would imagine that you're not going to have to take it very quickly, and you're not going to really have to compete with other people for it.
Let's go to Invert Polarity, which is blue-red for an instant at rare. It says choose target spell, then flip a coin. Oh, great. If you win the flip, gain control of that spell, and you may choose new targets for it. Wow. If you lose the flip, counter targets. Oh, man. Or counter that spell. So we get to free roll here?
This card is absurd.
That's awesome.
Like, imagine they play a 5 mana creature, and you're like, all right, pay 3. If you lose the flip, if you're unlucky, you just cast cancel. Okay, that's not bad, but it's not like, it's not great, but it's not like you lost out. You spent 3 mana to counter their 5 mana spell. But what happens when you win the flip? You just put a 5 mana card into play on your side of the board. What? It's like you played a 3 mana control magic. Like,
flip a coin. If it's tails, you get $10. If it's heads, you get $20. It's like, I will flip that coin. Yes.
No. It's like if it's tails, you get $5, and if it's head, you get $50. Like it's really, really messed up. I had 2 of these in the early access event, and I actually lost my first 4 flips or whatever, but it was still fine. And then when I won a flip, I won the game immediately. I countered a 5 and just put it into play on my side. It's like,
okay.
So I think Invert Polarity is honestly like an A. Like
it does actually seem like a reasonable baseline with obscene upside.
I mean, this card's modern playable. Like you just cast this on any card that costs even 3 mana. If you win the flip, you both traded 1 for 1. You both spent 3, but you have a 3 mana spell in play.
That's awesome. Okay, A for Invert Polarity. Next is White of the Reliquary. This is green-black for a 2/2 zombie knight at rare. It's got vigilance. And it says White of the Reliquary gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard. And tap it and sacrifice another creature. search your library for a land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle.
I mean, green black for a 2/2 vigilance that's probably going to be like a 4/4 or 5/5 as the game progresses is not bad. And then you wouldn't think that sacking a creature for a land is like a fantastic deal, but if you have like germ tokens off living weapon, or you're making the eldrazi spawn or what have you, there's a lot of ways to generate little idiots. It gets pretty good. Like this card I think is solid.
Like a B?
Yeah, I would say it's like a B. Well, B minus. Like it's just okay. The more you build around it, the better it is. But it's not quite a build around. It's just good in like the grimy black-green graveyard token style decks. There's some amount of that,
Next is Flage, Titan of Fire's Fury. This is 1 red-white for a 6/6 legendary Elder Giant at Mythic Rare. And when it enters a battlefield, you sacrifice it unless it escaped. Its escape cost is red, white, and exile 5 other cards from your graveyard. And then, so you might want to know what happens when it ETBs. When it ETBs or attacks, it deals 3 damage to any target and you gain 3 life. So if you just cast it for 3 mana as a creature, you get to Lightning Helix something, but you do have to sacrifice Flage. But then if you can escape it, it comes back in. Lightning Helix is something else. It's a freaking 6/6. And whenever it attacks, it Lightning Helixes more stuff. Wow.
This might be the best card in the set, or at least it's comparable.
Unbelievable.
It's an A+. I played with this card and it's unbelievable. So the thing is, in order to get 5 cards in your graveyard, you just have to play the game of Magic and have it continue. You know what a good way to do that is? Kill one of their creatures and gain 3 life.
Exactly. Okay, A+ for Flage. By the way, BDM had 2 of those in his pre-release pile. Next is Nadu, Winged Wisdom. This is 1 green-blue for a 3/4 legendary bird wizard. It's rare. It's got flying, so 3 mana, 3/4 flyer. And creatures you control have, whenever this creature becomes a target of a spell or ability, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, put it into your hand. This ability triggers only twice each turn.
This card is just absolutely ridiculous. What were they thinking?
That's insane.
it puts its spell or ability, it puts the land in untapped, and the ability triggers twice each turn is the fakest line of text I've ever seen in my life. you realize that doesn't mean Nadu triggers twice a turn. That means every creature you play triggers twice a turn.
Oh, come on. Are you serious? Because each creature has it itself? Oh, yes, that's hilarious.
It is just absolutely ridiculous. And I think this card is very likely to break Modern. But even in Limited, 3 mana, 3/4 flyer, if they go to kill it, you better than draw a card, because if it's a land, it just goes into play. It protects all your other creatures. And if you have like a fight spell or anything that targets your own creature, you get to do it. Nadu's an A, and just I don't understand why this is the place they chose to put twice a turn when it then applies to each one of your creatures. Like, it just makes no sense to me.
Also triggers only twice each turn is kind of a slow roll. Next is Arna Kennerud, Sky Captain. This is 2 white, blue, black for a 4/4 legendary human knight at Mythic Rare. It's got flying and lifelink. So 5 mana, 4/4 flying, lifelink. With ward, they have to discard a card. So that's pretty good. And then whenever a modified creature you control attacks, double the number of each kind of counter on it. Then for each non-token permanent attached to it, create a token that's a copy of that permanent attached to that creature. So they're kind of trying to cover like the 2 ways that things get modified the most, right? Which is like counters on it, or in this set, bestowed or it up or whatever. And yeah, they covered it. I mean, it's a little awkward because the counters are like +1/+1 counters really matter. And I don't think the other counters really matter for doubling up. Like, you don't get to fly higher if you have a flying counter. Still, I mean, this thing, tough to kill, 5 mana, 4/4 flying lifelink that cares about your modified stuff and gets you bonuses for it. That all seems fine to me.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge here is, can you cast it? It's a little bit difficult, but this is a format where it seems like you can do this sort of thing. So, I mean, the baseline of 5/5 or 5 mana, 4/4 flying lifelink with a ward, I would play this if I had Esper mana available.
I think so too.
That makes it just like a B. I would say Arna gets a B.
I think it's a B, and then you get to build around B+ if you can start popping off. Next is Kalia of the Vast. This is 1 red, black, white for a 2/2 flying legendary human cleric at Mythic Rare. Whenever Kalia of the Vast attacks an opponent, you may put an angel, demon, or dragon creature card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking that opponent. I assume that's not triggering that much here.
Basically never. I would say that this is an F, because even if you did have one of those types in your deck, you're getting 3 different colors of mana, playing a 4-mana 2/2 flyer and hoping it attacks.
Yeah, you have to be breaking Kalia of the Vast, which, by the way, is completely broken if you get to start turning it sideways in the right build, but not in this set. Next is the Necro Bloom. This is 1 white, black, green for a 2/7 legendary creature plant. It is rare. It has landfall. Create a 0/1 green plant creature token. If you control 7 or more lands with different names, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token instead. And it says land cards in your graveyard have dredge 2. And that means you may return a land card from your graveyard to your hand and mill 2 cards instead of drawing a card.
I played with this card and it's fine. It mostly makes O1s, but eventually, if you've got it, if you spread out your fetch lands and whatnot, you start making 2/2s. But it's also a 2/7, which is pretty good. And because there's common fetch lands, dredging one of those is not crazy. It double triggers the Necro Bloom. You know, gets you up to that 7 mana or 7 different land types and whatnot. So this is a build around in the sense that it's a 3-color card, so you do need to do a little bit of work in order to get there. But I would say that that the Necro Bloom is a fine card to put in your deck if you can swing the mana cost. You don't even really have to be working with it to make it worth it. Like a 2/7 blocks really well, and making a bunch of O1 tokens, you're just going to be hard to kill on the ground once you've done all that.
Very difficult. I like cards like that. Next is what did you want to give it? Sorry.
I would probably give it like a C+.
C+?
B-.
A little hard to cast. Yeah. Okay. Next is Brea Ethereum Shaper. This one costs 4 different colors of mana. It costs everything but green. So white, blue, black, red for a 4/4 legendary artifact creature, human, at Mythic Rare. And when Brea enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 blue Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying. And then you can pay 2 mana and sacrifice 2 artifacts to either do 3 damage to target player or planeswalker, or, sorry, there's actually 3 options, or target creature gets -4/-4 until end of turn, or you gain 5 life. I mean, am I stuck on the massing cost here? Because, yeah, everything looks good from there.
Look, it's a build around. It's a build around B where if you can get your deck to 4 colors, then this card is a pretty good one to cast. Like, it's not impossible to imagine doing so.
Yeah.
And it's a really powerful card. You get a 4/4 plus 2 1/1s, plus you get to do the whole triggered ability or the sack ability to, like, you know, you're not going to sack 2 1/1 flyers that often, but when you do, you can kill one of their creatures, or, you know, you do a sort of like block, sack, kill your other thing. So I would say build around B, with really the trick being like, how do you cast this thing?
How do you cast this? Yes. Okay, so that's it for gold. That'll move us to what ends up being colorless artifacts and lands. The first colorless card, because of Devoid, is called Ugin's Binding. It is 2 and a blue for an instant. It is Mythic Rare. As I mentioned, it has Devoid. It also says return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. And whenever you cast a colorless spell with mana value 7 or greater, you may exile Ugin's Binding from your graveyard. When you do, return each non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand.
This card is unbelievably good in the right matchups if you can reliably trigger the backside, which just means
it bounces all your stuff.
It cyclonic rifts them. It bounces all their stuff.
Oh, it bounces their stuff.
Yeah,
you don't control. Okay, I got you. Wow, yeah. That's nasty.
Though I did have a funny game against Gabriel Nassif in the early access where he had this card. I got him to use it, and then I wrathed. So he just bounced all my stuff, and then I got to wrath.
But, that's amazing.
that was fun. But
and so the baseline though is just a kind of inefficient bounce spell, just 3 mana bounce something.
Yeah, but if you cast this early, your opponent knows they're going to get rifted at some point, because you just don't put this in your deck if you can't trigger it.
Does that make it a lot worse that they know it's coming? I mean, your situation aside,
what are they going to do about it?
Right. That's what I'm thinking, is that it's like, you know, it's coming, but it's going to hurt.
Yeah. So I think this card is just incredible. Like, I would say that Ugin's Binding is a build around A, where just put it in Eldrazi deck and it's like an A level card.
Next this is going to be like, we're talking like a front runner for one of my favorite cards ever. It's called Null Drifter. They just combine like the two best things in Magic. It's a 7 mana 4/4 Eldrazi Elemental at Rare, and it has flying. And it says when you cast this spell, draw 2 cards. It also has Annihilator 1, but you can also evoke it for 2 and a blue, which means you can cast it for its evoke cost. If you do, it's sacrificed when it enters the battlefield, but you're still casting it, so you get the 2 cards out of the deal.
Yeah, Null Drifter is fantastic. You don't even really want to evoke it that often. You mostly just want to cast it as a 4/4 draw 2 with Annihilator.
Totally. Oh my God. That's all I want to do, Luis. That's all I want to do. Like, that is if you so can, awesome.
If you can get some like graveyard stuff or whatever, you can maybe evoke it and then get it back. But mostly just put this card in your deck. It'll be good.
How high of a grade can I give it?
You can give it a B+.
Okay, I'm going to give it the highest grade that you will allow me, because you can't trust me to impartially grade Null Drifter. Next is Eldrazi Linebreaker. This is 1 red and a colorless mana for a 3/3 Eldrazi at Rare. It's got Devoid and Trample. And it says at the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gains haste and +X+0 until end of turn, where X is the number of Eldrazi you control. Luis, I got to play with this card at that event thing I did. Right? It is nasty. It is such a beating. It doesn't cost any extra mana. That's the thing, right? Some of these cards that give haste, can seem worth it, but it can be tough because you usually have to play off curve. And this one doesn't make you. And then it also adds to its power, which is exactly what you want to be doing. I love the Linebreaker. The only question was, did you make sure you had access to colorless mana so you could cast it?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's an A-. Like, it's a little hard to cast, but it hits so hard. And then over the course of the games, you're just like, play another giant Eldrazi, hit you for 1,000,000 damage. It's really tough to beat.
What does a Haragast Erupting Nullkite do?
It's a 9 mana legendary Eldrazi dragon at Mythic Rare. It's a 6/6 and has emerged 6 red, so you can make it cheaper by sacking a creature and paying red plus some amount of other mana. Mm-hmm. When you cast it, you may exile your hand. If you do, draw 3 cards. It has flying. And it also says each creature spell you cast has emerged equal to its mana cost. So you can then start casting big things on the cheap by sacking your other things. So double red is definitely like a cost, because the Eldrazi decks, I think, want to be, somewhere in the red, blue, green spectrum, but like often blue, green is what's really ramping to the big stuff. The red's a little lower curve. But if you sack a 4-drop, you're only spending 4 mana. And you can probably set this up where you have somewhere between 0 and 2 cards in hand, so you're happy to get the 3 cards. And then maybe if you draw something big, you just play it the same turn by casting it.
Mm-hmm. What about just paying the 9?
You can also pay the 9. That is not crazy, but most of the time that you could pay the 9, you could have probably emerged it a little bit sooner, maybe.
Okay. I'm just wondering if you would actually rather wait so that you get full value on the 3 cards,
Yeah. I mean, it is definitely possible. Okay. But you can kind of work that out however you need it to be.
Seems awesome.
And it's just a great card. Like, I think it is quite strong.
Is it an A?
I would give it an A. Like, it's not hard to use this card.
Yeah.
Yeah. And once you do, you get to draw a bunch of cards, have a 6/6 flyer, and maybe even play other things on the cheap. It's just great.
Yeah, that's awesome. If there's going to be an Eldrazi dragon, that is what I want it to look like. Next is Thief of Existence. This is 1, a green, and a colorless for an Eldrazi with Devoid. It's rare. It's a 3/4. And it says, when you cast this spell, exile up to 1 target non-creature, non-land permanent an opponent controls with mana value 4 or less. If you do, Thief of Existence gains. When this creature leaves the battlefield, target opponent draws a card.
So this is a little bit more on the constructed side, but I think is still a pretty solid card. Like, you're not going to cast it turn 3 all the time, but there's enough common colorless lands that you want to play that it's not that hard. Mostly it's a 3-mana 3/4, but eating like a bestow card or a random artifact that's hanging around is pretty good. And then they get their card back eventually, but it's not going to be easy for them.
And it's a card, right? They don't get the thing that you ate back, right? They just get a
random card.
Yeah, so that's actually pretty good. Again, the mana cost is a bit of a speed bump. Still, this looks like, assuming that you can cast this, think of it like a gold card. That looks like a B to me.
Yeah, I would say B for Thief of Existence.
Sowing Myco's Spawn is 3 and a green for an Eldrazi fungus at rare. It's a 3/3 with Devoid. And it has Kicker for 1 and a colorless. And it says, when you cast this spell, search your library for a land card, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. Now that's just for 3 and a green. You get a 3/3 land, it's untapped, shuffle. But when you cast this spell, if it was kicked, you exile target land as well, like from your opponent. It's pretty sweet. So you can dump 6 mana into this thing, get a 3/3, get a land, and nail one of their lands too.
And even casting this for 4 mana is totally fine in the Eldrazi decks because it ramps you up to 6 or 7, puts a big creature into play. I would say the Myco Spawn gets a B+.
Yeah.
It's a very solid card.
Yeah, and I like when they put a little bit of land removal, at a admittedly difficult casting cost. Next is Abstruse Appropriation. This is 2 black-white for an instant with Devoid. It's rare, and it says exile target non-land permanent. You may cast that card for as long as it remains exiled, and you may spend colorless mana as though it were mana of any color to cast that spell. Wow. So you get to just take out anything and you get the thing?
Put this in your black-white deck. Hope you're playing against black or white because then you could just cast it by spending the actual mana. And most decks have a couple colorless sources. So if you have this card in your deck and you have a fetch land or two, just don't crack them unless you need to because you'd like to be able to play the permanent that you play. I mean, if you can, assuming you eventually recast whatever it is you killed, this card's like an A- power level. So awesome. I think that's not that hard to do.
Yeah, so it's between a B+ and an A- depending on your access to colorless mana. Next is Disruptor Flute. This is 2 mana for an artifact at rare. It's got flash, and when it enters the battle, or as it enters the battlefield, you choose a card name. Spells with the chosen name cost 3 more to cast, and activated abilities of sources with the chosen name can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. So we're talking about like extraordinarily narrow sideboard card here. And even then, are you ever bringing it in?
It can't even stop mana abilities.
Yeah.
So you can't use it to stop their like 1/3s that tap for 2 colorless.
Right. Or Eldrazi
like
Spawn, like nothing, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Looks like an F to me. You can't even name Eldrazi Spawn actually. So that
that's what I
definitely
said.
Doesn't work.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You can't even do that. Yeah. F for flute, as it were. Okay. This is a cycle. Are there all 5? Yeah. So there's these are medallions. There's an emerald, a jet, a pearl, a ruby, and a sapphire. And as you might imagine, there's one for each color. So example, Emerald Medallion is 2 mana for an artifact at rare. Green spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And that's true across the board for the different colors. So the question is, are these playable? And if any of them are, first. So are any of these playable?
No, F's across the board.
F's across the board.
They don't fix your mana. The only time you can kind of break them is by playing 2 spells in the same turn. But okay, slight caveat. The red and black ones might be playable in a very dedicated affinity deck where you really want artifacts in play, but you could just consider these Fs, and I think you'd be closer to correct than anything else.
Right, because you're almost playing them as an artifact with no text or very little text in that case. Next card then, since we're going to give Fs to all of those, is Kozilek's Command. This is X mana of any color and 2 colorless mana. That is steep. That is very difficult mana cost, but it is a kindred. Go ahead.
I want to point out that in the Eldrazi decks, I actually don't really think that's even true.
Sure.
Because they make spawns so easily. Yes. It just means this is an Eldrazi card.
It's like only Eldrazi. Exactly. It's a kindred instant Eldrazi. It's rare. It says choose 2. And you got 4 choices. The first one is target player creates X Eldrazi spawn. Choice number 2, target player scries X, then draws a card. Choice number 3, exile target creature with mana value X or less. And the last choice is exile up to X target cards from graveyards. So what's the best? Scry, draw a card,
you're almost
kill a thing?
always gonna kill one of their things, and then it's either going to be, do you want Eldrazi spawn or do you want to scry plus draw? Whatever, whichever one of those fits the game plan the best. I think a lot of the time it's going to be like cast this, kill your thing, and then scry to find a big Eldrazi, because double colorless, while the Eldrazi decks can eventually get there, they're not casting this on turn 4 that often. They're probably casting this turn 6 or 7, so digging for their next big play is good. But you could also cast this if you drew 2 of the fetch lands early, you didn't sack them, or you played one of the dorks that like taps for 2 colorless. You cast this on like turn 4 to kill their thing and put 3 Eldrazi into play, and then just slam a huge thing after that. So with the caveat that this is an Eldrazi card, I would say Kozilek's Command is a B+. It's a very strong card if you can cast it.
Yeah, you'd call it a build around B+, like, because you do have to make sure that it goes into that deck specifically. Next is Winter Moon. This is 2 mana for an artifact at rare. It says players can't untap more than 1 non-basic land during their untap steps. No, that's just an F.
That's enough.
Next is Urza's Incubator. This is 3 mana for an artifact at rare. As Urza's Incubator enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creature spells of the chosen type cost 2 less to cast. Is it worth it if you've got expensive Eldrazi to try to knock the price down with a card like Urza's Incubator? It can't be, right?
I think so, because this doesn't do anything on the board. Also, it's going to blow your mind when I tell you this, but this is symmetrical. So when you cast this on turn 3, they can play their 6-drop Eldrazi on turn 4.
Oh, you did blow my mind. Yeah, no way. So another F for Urza's Incubator. Now we get some heavy hitters here. First one is Echoes of Eternity. This is 3 and 3 colorless. So once again, really only Eldrazi. It's a Kindred Enchantment Eldrazi. It's rare. It says, if a triggered ability of a colorless spell you control or another colorless permanent you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. And whenever you cast a colorless spell, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy.
So if you can take a turn off and play a triple colorless 6-mana card that does nothing on the board, you then double all your Eldrazi's.
This is like the most win more of all time.
Yeah, which is funny because there's also on the bonus sheet that we're going to see, or the 10 commanders or whatever.
Special
there's
guess.
A card, not even special guess. Actually, I realized there's like another thing, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
There's another one that's actually a lot like this, but it's also like a 2/5, so that's a lot better. We'll talk about that one.
Okay.
I have had this card in a deck
you
that
put
was all
this
Eldrazi.
card in a deck?
No, I had it and then I didn't play it. I thought like ultimately I'm like, no, this just isn't as good as just playing a 6-mana Eldrazi.
Totally.
And not doing that.
And the whole point of Eldrazi is that you build up to this big point where they win you the game, where they take over, and you don't need to double them up to do that. This is ridiculous.
There are some matchups where, like the Eldrazi Mirror, for example, where I could see this card actually winning you the game, because you're both haymakering, you're both playing like 8/4s that gain you 10, all that stuff, and this will just get out of control super fast. I think this is probably not a card you should play. Like, it's like a build around. Like if it all lines up, I mean, triple colorless also means sometimes you just won't be able to cast this on turn 6.
It's just the biggest F I've ever seen. I mean, maybe you could put it in a sideboard situation like you said, but I would just give it an F.
I would say it's an F.
And trust me, I want that to be cool. It is cool, but I want it to be good. Next is Devourer of Destiny. This is 5 green for a 6/6 Eldrazi at rare. And it says, you may reveal this card from your opening hand. If you do, at the beginning of your first upkeep, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may put one of those cards back on top of your library and exile the rest. When you cast this spell, exile target permanent that's 1 or more colors. So this is just revealed if you do that beginning thing, like you still get to have the card.
Yeah, it's just in your hand.
Yeah.
And you get to not quite impulse because you don't draw the card, but I mean, you still get to keep this one. Mm-hmm. You get to set it up so you get to draw the best of your top 4 cards next turn. And when you cast this, it just eats one of their creatures. It can't hit Eldrazi, you can't hit everything else. I think Devourer of Destiny is great. I would say that it's like an A- in Eldrazi decks. Like it makes if it's in your opening hand, which is the worst place to see a 7-drop, it makes your deck a little more consistent. And when you do cast it, it just has a huge effect on the game. So A- for Devourer of Destiny, which brings us to, I think, the best colorless card, Kozilek, the Broken Reality. 9 mana, 9/9 Eldrazi at Mythic. When you cast it, up to 2 target players each manifest 2 cards from their hand. So they put the card face down as a 2/2 that you can flip up if it's a creature for its cost. Mm-hmm. For each card manifested this way, you draw a card. So it already kind of like breaks parity where it's like, okay, we each manifest 2, but I draw 4 cards. Kozilek also has the ability, other colorless creatures you control get +3/+2. So your 2 manifests are 5/4s and their manifests are 2/2s. While it also pumps all your Eldrazi in play, including the spawn, including whatever.
And can I just do this myself?
You don't have to let them manifest if you don't want, but you'll only draw 2 cards instead of 4.
And your manifests outrank theirs significantly.
While Kozilek's in play, like I have had the situation where you play Kozilek, they kill it, and it's like, it's not, you're not winning by as much. But the fact that it draws 4 cards means you have a follow-up.
So would your default be to do it for both players?
I think that you should default do it for both players, especially if they have like 2 cards in their hand, because then you just get their last 2 cards.
Right, and if they're like removal spells or something, you just nail. Okay, yeah, this seems unbelievable.
Yeah, I think Kozilek is an A. Like if you open this, you should pick one, pack one it, and draft an Eldrazi deck. It's one of the best reasons to be Eldrazi. And in my, albeit limited testing so far, Eldrazi is the deck I've drafted the most. I've drafted Eldrazi like 5 times. It's just a really good deck, I think. And Kozilek 9 is just quite castable.
That's what I was going to say, because our next card is Ulamog the Defiler at 10. Like, what? Are you nervous about that mana cost? Like, how big of a burden is 9?
I'm still putting it in my deck. I think Ulamog, well, let's read Ulamog. Let's talk about it. So Kozilek, I think, is just a flat A. Okay. Like, I would play this card. Maybe an A+, honestly.
Okay.
Ulamog is 10 mana for a 7/7 legendary Eldrazi at Mythic. When you cast it, target opponent exiles half their library, rounded up. Okay. So you start out by eating half of their deck. Mm-hmm. And then it has ward, sacrifice 2 permanents. So if they want to target this thing, they have to sack 2 permanents. And it enters the battlefield with +1/+1 counters equal to the greatest mana value among cards in exile. So remember, you exiled half their deck. So you're probably getting at least +5/+5. But if you're playing against Eldrazi, you might be getting +10/+10 or +9/+9.
That's hilarious. These are just counters on your 7/7? Yeah. Okay.
So it comes into play as like a 12/12 or 13/13 or bigger. Uh-huh. And it has Annihilator X, where X is the number of counters on it.
That's awesome.
So you cast this, you get like a minimum 12/12, if not more. It has Annihilator like 5+, ward sack 2 permanents, and it's massive. And it also exiled half their deck. So like I had a game against like a blue-black draw extra cards deck. They were down to 10 cards when I cast this. They go to 5 cards. They just scoop, because even if they killed it, they just couldn't beat me with 5 cards left in their deck.
Totally.
And that's obviously not like the normal case, but
it probably happens more often. For a 10 mana spell, you're probably getting up to about, you're getting down to not that many cards left. Yeah, this is awesome.
Yeah. So look, when you want to cast a 10-drop, you got to mean it. And that means playing a lot of ways to make Eldrazi spawn mostly, because what you'll probably do is get to like 7-ish lands and then just like sack some spawns and cast it. But, I mean, boy, does this card do the thing when you do that.
Kozilek's better, right?
Kozilek's definitely better, because Kozilek has more of an effect on the board and is 1 mana cheaper, which is a pretty big amount. Okay. But, I mean, I think Ulamog is still a reason to be Eldrazi. So,
you said A, pushing A+ for Kozilek. Where are we at on Ulamog?
Yeah, so all of the 3 big Eldrazi, because we're about to get to Emrakul, who costs 12, by the way, are effectively build-around cards in that you have to be playing the Eldrazi deck. You just cannot put these cards in a normal deck that's not doing that. On that scale, I would say Ulamog is a B. Like, okay. You still want this card in your deck. It is a finishing move. Like, you can lose when you get to 10 mana with these decks. Like, having a way to utilize that is good, and there's a lot of ways to help cast it. Like Path of Annihilation, the uncommon that makes your Eldrazi tap for mana. Yeah. Like, that by itself casts any of these, like on turn 5. Right. Like, it's so easy. And so I would give Ulamog a B, and then that moves us to Emrakul the World Anew, which is 12 mana for a 12/12 legendary Eldrazi at Mythic. When you cast it, gain control of all creatures target player controls. So you just take all their creatures. It has flying, it has protection from spells, and it has protection from permanents that were cast this turn. So you can't hit it with a Planeswalker or like an Oblivion Ring type effect.
Right.
And when it leaves the battlefield, you sack all your creatures.
All the ones you control?
Yes.
Oh, nice.
Which means all yours and all theirs. And it also has Madness, pay 6, colorless. That I don't really know how you're doing. That seems like more of a, leave this to the professionals in Constructed or whatever.
Right.
Because how are you discarding this and you have 6 colorless mana?
Yeah,
that doesn't seem
that's not much of a thing.
Particularly realistic. But
is 12 mana realistic?
I mean, I have cast this and I've had it cast against me.
Okay,
Yeah,
I was going to say, because you had me at 9 and I was willing to maybe, flirt with 10, but 12 really does seem like another level.
I think that if you see Emrakul early, you could take this as a reason to go into Eldrazi.
Okay.
I would be more comfortable taking this like pack 2 or 3 when I know that my deck's capable of doing big things. But like, let's say you go, first pick Snapping Voidcrod of like a kind of medium pack. That's the 1/3 that taps for 2 colorless. Then you take like a Brood Scale, the 2 mana 2/2 that adapts, makes a 1/1 token. And then you got a Path of Annihilation third. You're like, all right, great, Eldrazi's open. If I saw Emrakul fourth, I am slamming that thing. Like
Okay.
that is just going to be the best card for you. So I would say this is about on par with Ulamog, where you really have to be going hard on ramp. And there's going to be some games that Ulamog and Emrakul will lose you that Kozilek wouldn't, because every additional turn is like is a huge difference. But I mean, when you cast Emrakul, like even if they can somehow kill it, which is not easy to do, then everyone loses all their creatures. It's not even like you're that far behind.
B-?
I would just give it a B. I just say it's like you got to be mean. You got to mean it, but it's good when you do.
Okay. And then we've got, looks like a cycle of lands here. First one is Monumental Henge. This is a land that enters a battlefield tapped unless you control a plains, and it taps for white mana. And it looks like the other ones have that same type of clause. It's a rare. And you can pay 2 white and tap it to look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a historic card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And just as a reminder, artifacts, legendaries, and sagas are historic.
Yeah, so the same is true for basically all of these lands, which is if you can use the ability somehow, it's fairly low cost to put them in your deck. Like, it's actually higher cost than a normal format because sometimes you have these like fetch lands like as like almost like a third of your mana base. So if you haven't had a chance to fetch, this would be tapped, but that's not that big of a deal.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, I would say that this one is like you're not activating this in games you're winning very often.
Right.
So it's like a D level card. Maybe I would play it if I had a couple targets.
It's so expensive to activate. I mean,
I just wouldn't take it over anything.
Yeah, exactly. D plus C minus for Monumental Henge. Next is Archway of Innovation. This is the blue version of that, so same thing with the tapped. But the activated ability is blue, tap it. The next spell you cast this turn has Improvise, which means your artifacts can help cast it.
I'm really not that into this either.
Yeah, you have to pay mana.
So in order for this to net you mana, you have to tap 3 artifacts, and even then you're netting 1 mana. So it looks kind of like an F to me.
Me too. Next is Phyrexian Tower. This is a legendary land. It's mythic rare. It taps to add colorless, like actual colorless, or you can tap it and sacrifice a creature to add 2 black mana. Very powerful.
I don't think most decks will want this because the downside of colorless is pretty big. Slight caveat. If you're an Eldrazi deck and you need any of these lands that produce colorless, that's fine. That's a different thing. Mm-hmm. But I haven't even played wastes in my deck so far. You just always get enough of the fetch lands. And and then sacking a creature to add 2 black is just not a very good ability. I would say F on the tower. If you have a really dedicated sack deck and you need ways to sacrifice, like you have cards that do that, then you can put this card in your deck. But I haven't really run into that.
But you don't want to do it just to like, hey, I'm going to make some extra mana and be a turn ahead or whatever. Like that's not.
I don't think that's something that's going to happen too often.
Spymaster's Vault is next. That's the black version of that cycle. And its activated ability is you can play black, tap it, and have target creature you control connive X, where X is the number of creatures that died this turn. You draw
this one I like.
Draw X cards, discard X cards, and put +1/+1 counters for each non-land discarded this way.
Yeah, this is a real ability. Like, if 2 creatures trade, you just get to tap a black and tap this, and as long as you have a creature in play still, you get to draw 2, discard 2, maybe put some counters on this. I would say the Spymaster's Vault's like a B. You're pretty happy putting this card in your deck.
Yeah, for so cheap. Next is Arena of Glory. This is the red version, and the red one is red, tap, exert Arena of Glory, which means that if you do exert it at one untap during its next untap step, and you add red, if that mana is spent to cast a creature spell, it gains haste until end of turn. Wow.
Yeah, this one's good too. Like, I would say this is like a C. Like, you're not going to go out of your way, but if you have this card in play, your opponent has to be worried that you might unleash one or even two hasters. You have to spend 1 mana on each creature to do that, but that works too.
Very nice. The green one is called Shifting Woodland, and it has Delirium. You can pay 2 green. Shifting Woodland becomes a copy of target permanent card in your graveyard until end of turn, but you can only activate it if there are 4 or more types among cards in your graveyard.
This one's great too. Like, late in the game, this just becomes a creature that you know, out of your graveyard that you need, that if you have some good options, which I don't think is going to be that hard to do. So it's just a land that at the middle / end of the game, you get to start attacking with it.
Yeah.
So I would say this is a B also. I think it's a pretty good reward.
And then we've got Bloodstained Mire, Flooded Strand, Polluted Delta, Windswept Heath, and I always call it that, Wooded Foothills, which are traditional fetch lands. So Bloodstained Mire, for example, is a land, rare. They're all rare. You can tap it, pay a life, sacrifice it, search your library for a swamp or mountain card and put it onto the battlefield and then shuffle. And then, of course, there's one for each of those color pairs that I mentioned.
If you're those colors, these are comparable to the common fetches. A little worse if you're Eldrazi and you care about the colorless, funnily enough.
Yeah, that's weird.
But they're all around like B-level cards. Like, fixing is just really good.
Okay. Then there's a card called Deserted Temple. It's a land at rare that taps for colorless. Or you can pay 1 mana and tap this to untap another untap target land. What's the point of that? I mean,
it's for constructed. It technically could get you double color, but mostly you will never play this unless you need a colorless land for your Eldrazi deck. So it's, you know, F-ish under that circumstance.
And then Ugin's Labyrinth is a land at Mythic Rare. It has Imprint. When it enters the battlefield, you may exile a colorless card with mana value 7 or greater from your hand. It taps to add colorless. If a card is exiled with it, it adds double colorless instead, and then you can tap it to return the exiled card to its owner's hand. So he kind of borrows a big eldrazi to pump out some stuff, and then you can get it back later.
This card's awesome. You play this early. It's an Ancient Tomb that taps for 2 colorless. Like, and then you don't even lose the card. You eventually get it back when you don't need it to tap for 2. Like,
yeah, that's nasty.
You just go like turn 2, play this, exile one of the common 7 drops, cast the like 2 and a green 3/3 that makes a token. Next turn, cast a 4 drop, and you're just cruising. And then at some point, you're like, all right, I want my Drownyard dude back, and so I'll tap it and take it back.
You mean Null Drifter? Null Drifter. That's what we're.
Oh, sure, Null Drifter.
Yeah.
I would say Ugin's Labyrinth is like a B, like
right?
Bordering on B plus. Like, I would take this over almost every common, and probably not every uncommon. There's some pretty good ones. If I was in an dedicated Eldrazi deck, just such a powerful ability. Like, imagine you have your Emrakul in your opening hand.
No kidding.
And you just get to stash it here and use it, and then later you get to cast it.
And then there's also just little benefits and weird things that'll come up if somebody tries to like take it from your hand. It's not there, etc.
Right.
And then we're not doing Flusterstorm, right? That's just sort of randomly here.
Yeah, I don't think that's a thing. I think if it was legal, it'd be like a sideboard C. It's not even a very good card.
Okay. Special guests?
Yeah, we've got special guests, and then we have that set of commanders as well.
How many commanders are there?
Let me check. But
okay. I'll start off with special guest number 1, which is Thought-Knot Seer. Oh boy. 3 and a colorless for a 4/4 Eldrazi, and when it enters a battlefield, target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it and exile that card. When Thought-Knot Seer leaves the battlefield, target opponent draws a card. Man, this thing has already had its heyday in Modern, but this card's awesome. 4 mana 4/4 that takes the card away. If they never kill it, then the card's just gone, and it's exiled, by the way, which is extra good. And then if they ever do, they get a random card back, but they don't get the one that you took. Like, that's the thing that it doesn't really stand out at first when you read Thought-Knot Seer, is that like they don't get that card back. They get, some land or something else off the top. Very, very powerful. Only question is, do you have access to colorless mana? And if you do, then you should be playing Thought-Knot Seer like every single time.
Yeah, it's very strong in an Eldrazi deck.
B plus? A minus?
I would say B plus.
B plus for Thought-Knot Seer. Next is Prismatic Ending. This is white X for a sorcery. These are all under the special guest, by the way. And it has Converge. Exile target non-land permanent if its mana value is less than or equal to the number of colors of mana spent to cast this spell. So you can just pay white and exile a 1 or 0 drop. You can pay white plus another color to hit a 2 or less. And then most of the time you might have access to another color, in which case you could exile a 3 mana.
Yeah. Totally playable
permanent
card in any white deck. Yeah. Like Portable Hole was a fine card, right? Mm-hmm. White to remove a 2 or less permanent. This is very similar to that. And yeah, like sometimes you'll wish that you could have spent 3 or 4 mana to kill a bigger thing, but most of the time it's going to hit the things you need to hit, and you'll be completely okay with how that went down.
You like B for Prismatic Ending? I mean, it doesn't hit big stuff.
Yeah, but it's a very solid removal spell.
Speaking of, Dismember, 1 and then 2 Phyrexian black mana. So either, actual black mana, or you can pay 2 life for either or both of those. And it's an instant that gives a creature -5/-5 until end of turn. I mean, you could pay as little as 1 mana from, 1 mana to give something -5/-5 at instant speed. This thing is a hammer. I think the question is, if you're playing black, it's an obvious no-brainer. Would you put this into a deck that didn't have access to black mana?
Oh, all the time. I mean, this card is just an A. Like,
yeah.
If you see this card in your pack, you should probably just take it because it's a colorless card. It doesn't commit you to anything. And trust me, you will get people good when they do not know about this card.
Definitely.
Like, you have a twisted landscape up and they're just like, play my pump spell. And you're just like, all right, Dismember.
Yeah.
Like exactly. I played with this card a lot. I rarely pass it in cube, and it's this is just I think a fantastic card.
Yeah, no joke. Dismember is one of the best removal spells ever printed. It really is. Like it's probably top 5.
Unbelievably good.
It's unbelievably good. Next is Persist. This is 1 and a black for a sorcery. Return target non-legendary creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it.
Yeah, this is just fine. I would say Persist is, if you have some good targets for it, it modifies the creature. So if you do care about that, it's nice. And if you have a lot of quality creatures to bring back, I would say it's like a C-level card. It has some big upsides. Like, I mean, you can like cycle a Warp Tusker on turn 3, then turn 4 Persist it, and you have a 5/7 reach, but that's not like incredible or anything. So I would say like a C+ for Persist.
Yeah. Next is Expressive Iteration. Man, these are some nice ones. Blue-red for a sorcery. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put one of them in your hand, one of them in the bottom of your library, and exile one of them, and you can play the exiled one. Almost never want to play this on 2. This is usually a turn 3 play or later.
The best thing to do is play it where you haven't played a land drop. Then if you see one land out of the top 3, that's the card you exile and play this turn.
Yep.
It's like a C+. It's a draw 2.
It only costs 2 mana with a bit of selection. Yeah. Really good. And then the last of these is we've got the pitch elementals. So the first one is Solitude, which is 3 white for a 3/2 flash lifelink that when it enters the battlefield, you exile up to 1 other target creature. That creature's controller gains life equal to its power. But these all have Evoke. And you can exile, in this case, a white card from your hand to cast it for free. Now it's evoked though, meaning that it hits the battlefield and then it gets sacrificed after it hits the battlefield, but you still get that ETB trigger. So, this is removal of the highest order. You can cast it for free at instant speed if you can evoke it. And Solitude is an absolute house. I
mean, we could even combine Solitude and Fury here because the same comments really apply to both. Fury's
I'll read Fury.
3 red.
You got it. Go ahead.
I can read it from my memory because I've played with the card about 1,000 times now.
I'll correct you when you...
All right, just make sure. Be on target. 3 red for a 3/3 double strike. You can evoke by exiling a red card, and it deals 4 damage divided as you choose among creatures and planeswalkers. So
you nailed it.
And both these cards are literal A+, where you should ideally not evoke them because you just want to cast them.
Yes.
But if you have to evoke them, it's also really, really good to be able to do so.
It's so good. These cards are unbelievable. They're houses in Vintage Cube. They're going to be really great here too.
I mean, they're very hard to open because the special guests are pretty rare, which is great. Because so Fury and Solitude are both A+. Like
Yes.
these cards are just unbelievable. You should never pass them if you're in their colors, and you should seriously consider going into those colors if you have the ability to do so.
And then that moves us to Subtlety, which is the blue one. It's 2 blue for a 3/3 flash flyer. And when it enters the battlefield, you choose up to one target creature, spell, or planeswalker spell, so something on the stack. Its owner puts it on the top or bottom of their library. You know, so, this one's a step down from Solitude and Fury.
Definitely. And by step down, we mean it's
still
like
good.
An A-, probably.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
These are so rare your opponents aren't going to play around them. When you leave the mana up for Subtlety on turn 4 and just pass, and they just cast a spell, you played a 3/3 flyer that effectively counter their spell. Like they can redraw it and cast it, but like, what are we doing here? Like they're just so dead.
Right. And don't forget, you can also just flash it in and block their 2/2 or whatever and just eat a creature when they don't cast
Or just play it
something.
end of turn and attack them.
Yeah.
Like
really great card.
Like Subtlety is just ridiculously good. And, you know, all of these, this is a fast, powerful format. I can definitely see games where you tap out on turn 5 and play something, and then they play something on their turn 5, and you just pitch cast Subtlety and then play your 6-drop, and you got to force of will them.
Totally. Next is Grief, which is another really good one. 2 black for a 3/2 menace, and when it enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it, and they discard it. It can be whatever you want. Grief is awesome too.
Yeah, Grief is like a B because you aren't really going to ever want to pitch cast it unless you're like in desperate situation or you know they're casting something good next turn. And hard casting it is totally good. You get a 2-for-1 out of the deal.
Yeah,
but
I think I would give it a B+. I mean, it's a
B+ is fine.
Yeah, 3/2. You know, it's a really good creature with a tacked on Thoughtseize. I mean, it's very, very good. And then the worst one traditionally is Endurance, which is 1 green for a 3/4 flash reach. And that's all great. But when it enters the battlefield, up to one target player puts all the cards from their graveyard on the bottom of their library in a random order. So you're not getting, you're not killing something. You're not getting a card out of it for Endurance. It is highly disruptive to decks that care about it. And you're getting a really good body. A 3/4 flash reach can eat a creature a lot of the time. So, this isn't to really knock Endurance that much. But I mean, unless you're playing it, in a format that has like a bunch of Reanimator in it or something, Endurance is going to be a step down from these other ones as well.
Yeah, I would say it's a B because you're just going to get to ambush a creature early in the game fairly often. But it's
big.
It's not a bomb at the same level as these other cards for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So that's it for the special guests.
Yep. We then have the commanders here. So I linked it there. So we're going to start with Disa the Restless. These 8 commanders show up in packs as well. It's 2 red, black, green. So 2 plus Jund mana for a 5/6 legendary human scout and mythic rare. And when it says whenever a Lurgoyf permanent is put in your graveyard from any, from anywhere other than the battlefield, put it onto the battlefield. So that's pretty meaningless text. It's not going to happen often.
There's one.
But the relevant text is whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a Tarmogoyf token. So you get an actual Tarmogoyf.
And it's a Goyf, like it's a straight up Tarmogoyf.
Oh, yeah. But it's funny because the first 2 don't work with the second two. Right. The first ability doesn't work with the second one.
Yeah. And this thing doesn't have any evasion. It's just a straight up 5/6 for 5.
Yeah. 5/6 for 5, triple color. So it's like a little difficult to cast. And then when you hit them, you make a Tarmogoyf. So I think it's a solid card.
That does seem actually pretty good.
If you can cast this and hit them once, you get it like with another creature. It doesn't even have to be itself.
Right.
You get a Tarmogoyf. Like that's pretty good.
It's probably a 2/3 or a 3/4 like we talked about before. And it's more likely to be so because it counts the opposing graveyard.
It's probably bigger. Especially
it might actually be a 3/4, 4/5 on average. Yeah. All right. Yeah. I mean, if you can cast Disa the Restless, I'm in. I would give it a B. Maybe a B+. I don't know. It's somewhere in that range.
We'll just say B for Disa here.
Next is Omo, Queen of Vesuva. This is 2 and a green or 2 and a blue. You can choose. It's a 1/5 legendary shapeshifter noble. These are all mythic rare for whatever that's worth. Whenever Omo enters the battlefield or attacks, put an everything counter on each of up to 1 target land and up to 1 target creature. Each land with an everything counter on it is every land type in addition to its other types. And each non-land creature is an everything with an everything counter on it is every creature type.
These just don't, none of these things do anything.
No.
I would say it's just an F. Yeah.
Just an F. Next is Satya Aetherflux Genius. This is 1 blue, red, white for a 3/5 legendary human artificer with menace and haste. Oh, nice. 4 mana, 3/5 menace haste. And whenever Satya attacks, create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of up to one other target non-token creature you control. You get 2 energy. At the beginning of the next end step, sacrifice that token unless you pay an amount of energy equal to its mana value.
So you play this, it's got menace and haste, and it's a 3/5, so it's like pretty difficult to deal with.
It's getting in.
And then you also get to attack them with a token of your other creatures. It probably, one of your other creatures, it probably goes away unless it's cheap or unless you have other energy sources. But this even gives you 2 to start out with, and you're hitting them for a bunch. Like I think,
and if you stop it that one time, do you just get to keep it forever?
Yeah, it only has the this goes away trigger once.
Wow. I mean, I figure if you can get this thing down, send it in, make a copy, and keep it, like your win percent just spiked, right? You've got this plus a copy of your best other non-token creature that gets to stay. Like that's incredible.
And in a, not so coincidentally, it's in the Jeskai colors, which is all the energy cards.
Totally.
So
yeah, Satya looks awesome.
Yeah, I think this card is really sweet.
I would say B+ to A- for Satya Aetherflux Genius.
I think I would just say A-.
Yeah.
It needs a little help. The mana cost is the biggest issue.
Definitely.
It's just not that, it's not that hard in this format. And when it will reward you amply when you do it.
Next is Ulalek Fused Atrocity. Mana cost is a real bear on this one. So you can pay Wooburg, like just straight up one of each mana, but you can sub any of those for a colorless mana. So for example, you could just pay 5 colorless mana for this, or you could pay red, green, and 3 colorless in any combinations that you want. It's a legendary Eldrazi. It's a 2/5 with Devoid, so somehow it's a Wooburg card that's also colorless. Whenever you cast an Eldrazi spell, you may pay 2 colorless mana. If you do, copy all spells you control, then copy all other activated and triggered abilities you control. You may choose new targets for the copies. Mana abilities can't be copied. So that's, it doubles the Eldrazi plus the trigger from the Eldrazi.
Yeah, it's actually exactly the same as Echoes. I mean, you do have to spend. You do have to spend colorless, but I actually have had this card in a deck, and it is reasonably castable, because imagine you're an Eldrazi deck that's like Teamer, which is pretty common.
Yeah.
So you have red, blue, green. You just need 2 colorless on top of that.
Yeah.
Totally doable.
Yeah.
And when it's in play, it's a 2/5. It's got actual stats. If they don't kill it next turn, you're like, play Petrifying Meddler, pay 2 colorless, get another 4/5 and another trigger.
Come on, we play Null Drifter. Are you gonna? You got to.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I forgot.
Give me my Null Drifter. Yeah. Draw a couple of cards.
I think, and I think that is just like a extremely doable thing.
So much better than that enchantment. I mean, this thing can block well.
Yeah.
It actually gets you to the point that you could start casting these things. Yeah, it's hard to cast, but like you said, it's not impossible. That's an interesting card. It's clearly a build around.
Yeah, but I think it's like a build around B.
Right? Yeah.
Look, there will be some times when you have this in your hand and you're unable to cast it. I think that even an Eldrazi deck, I think that is definitely within the range. But I still think that the card is really good. So if you're going hard on Eldrazi and you have a lot of colorless, Ulalek looks like a great addition. I would give it a build around B.
I agree. Next is Azlask the Swelling Scourge. This is 3 mana for a 2/2 legendary Eldrazi. And it says, whenever it or another colorless creature you control dies, you get an experience counter. That goes on you as a player. Then its activated ability is Wooburg, 1 of each color of mana. Creatures you control get +X until end of turn, where X is the number of experience counters you have. Scions and spawns you control gain Indestructible and Annihilator 1 until end of turn.
Yeah, this is an F. You're not getting to 5 colors of mana in the Eldrazi deck. Like,
no, that's the whole point is that you don't, right?
Yeah, like this card does not do it for me. So really I would say Azlask is an F.
What about
next
Kaith?
up is Kaith, Famed Mechanist. So 1 plus Jeskai, 1 blue, white, red for a 3/3 legendary dwarf artificer. Fabricate 1, and other non-token creatures you control have Fabricate 1. So every time you get a creature, or you have a creature enter the battlefield, you get a +1/+1 counter on it, or a 1/1 servo. And Kaith has 2 tap, choose 1. Proliferate or populate. So
nice.
You either add a 1 to each counter or get an extra servo. This is fine. Like, the fact that she gives you 1 on the house is a pretty nice start. I think that you'll put this card in your deck if you're Jeskai a decent amount of the time. But
I think so.
Unlike Satya, this isn't like, oh, I'm going to go Jeskai for this card. I think this card's like a B. Like you're just like, okay, I will put this card in my deck. I'm not going to go out of my way to enable it.
Yeah, I agree. But I like that it gets you started with your own little servo, probably. Next is Koram the Undertaker. This is 1 green, red, black for a 0/5 legendary human warrior. It gets +X/+0, where X is the greatest power among creature cards in all graveyards. So the one biggest creature. And then whenever it attacks, each player mills a card. And during each of your turns, you may play a land and cast a spell from among cards in graveyards that were put there from libraries this turn. That's nice.
Yeah, I mean you're going to end up getting to attack with probably like a 3/5 or a 4/5, and if it survives combat, then you get to play those cards or play a land and a card. Like, you don't get to do both, but that's pretty strong. I mean, I think this card, if you can cast it, again, that's the key with all these triple color cards. It is going to be pretty good.
Yeah, that does look pretty strong to me. I would give it a B, again, if you can put it on the battlefield.
Yeah, I agree.
Last card is Jyoti Moag Ancient. This is 2 green blue for a 2/4 legendary elemental. And when it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 green forest dryad land creature token for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone this game.
Just you could just stop there. It does
that's just
nothing.
Irrelevant.
Beginning of combat, land creatures you control get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is its power. So this card's it's an F. It's a 4 mana 2/4 no text.
Yeah. So Jyoti Moag Ancient gets an F. Whew. What are you looking forward to here?
Drafting Eldrazi. I'm loving it. Like, it's just really fun to I love drafting Eldrazi and Rise of Eldrazi. I didn't love it in Zendikar, in Battle for Zendikar, because that format was one of the worst formats of all time and nothing was fun really there. But I have really liked drafting Eldrazi in this set.
All right, so you have to pick Kozilek, Ulamog, Emrakul, or Null Drifter. Since they're all the best, you know.
I think Kozilek is the best of those, but I think Null Drifter second.
Yeah, all right.
The other ones are castable. You
it's
can
a
do
legend.
The thing.
It's not a legend, but it's a legend. All right, man. Great job. Absolutely cannot wait to die. I'm so jealous that you've got to play this format all those times. And it is going to be my turn. I'm probably not going to quite catch up to you with that kind of lead.
You got to play it before I did.
I got to sort of play it.
You literally got to play it before I did.
I did, but then you got to play it
in the toughest arena imaginable.
Yeah, against freaking Turian. But you've, you know, how many did you say you've done? 20?
No, I haven't done that many. I think probably like 12-ish drafts.
Okay, 12. All right. Well, I'll be right on your heels shortly.
Maybe
enough.
13.
If you want to find us on social media, Marshall_LR, Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com, including the common and uncommon set review. If you want to go back and listen to that went out last week. So that one's sitting there. And then, you know, this one will be here too. We want to thank our sponsor, Ultimate Guard, for their support of the show. Again, if you want to check out their products, deck boxes, sleeves, that kind of stuff, you can go to ultimateguard.com and you can buy them from your local game store or your favorite online retailer. And of course, our patrons for supporting us on Patreon. That's going to do it for this show. We will see you next week.
All right. Well, I've got a bit of an announcement for LR fans, I suppose, or maybe just people listening. So I am going to go to the Pro Tour in Amsterdam. And the reason I did not go to the Pro Tour in Seattle is that Gabby and I are actually expecting not just one, but two babies. We're getting a 2-for-1. So we've got
Luis is the value king.
I guess so. It is, I would say more than we bargained for, but well within the range of outcomes. And we got twins due in November. So,
oh man, congratulations.
Wish us luck, Marshall.
It's so great. I mean, you're always talking about 2-for-1s and you got the ultimate life 2-for-1. It's just incredible.
Yeah, gonna have my hands full here, but I love it. I honestly do love it, and I am looking forward to it, especially once the dust settles. Check in on me in like a year and a half, and then we're kind of getting there. But hey, I'm a big fan of increasing the brood, as it were, and I think that this is going to be exhausting but fun. So I also might take a bit of a leave of absence from the show. We'll talk about that, of course. We'll figure it out. Yeah. But I wanted to let folks know because it is not really a secret anymore. Though that's why I couldn't mention anything. The timing with the Pro Tour for Seattle was a little bit awkward. And the dog's going nuts over here. But yeah, that's
speaking
exciting
of the brood.
news. And we'll I'll keep you updated on how all that goes.
All right, congrats, man.
Thank you.